Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Winter Lorefest Day 2. This is going to be top 8 approaching in just a few moments as we had 5 rounds of Swiss yesterday, and we will be finishing off today. I have been informed we are going to have a uh, Amber Amethyst mirror match. However, one player playing the Monstro combo, one without. So we'll see if that factors into the matchup that is approaching here very, very shortly. This tournament is coming to you from our last of set 10 set 10, excuse me, before we get to the Winter Spell pre-release and future pre-release or future Winter Spell constructed tournaments. So that will be approaching very, very soon. Players are getting ready. Hmm. Jack, hello. All good? All right. So if you're just joining us, we are beginning our top 8 of the Winter Lorefest. This is day 2. So thanks for joining us. And we're going to have a Amber Amethyst mirror match today of sorts. However, I have been informed that one player is on the Monster Whale combo and one player is without that offering. So we'll see if that makes an impact at all. Here in the matchup, you have Waffles on the right side of your screen as players are going through their alterations. And meanwhile, B. Delenius on the left side of your screen, I believe his name is Brandon. And we will be going in just a few moments. As you can see, Waffles, I believe, sent all 7 back. A lot of these times, these decks will prioritize having that turn to Lantern. We even saw a Huey in a deck list yesterday, and it looks like Brandon sending 7 or sending 6, excuse me, on the left side of your screen. I'm not entirely sure who the top seed is here, but I can find out here shortly. But I assume seeding is determining play draw in this matchup, and I believe Brandon will be on the play. Looks like we will get going here just shortly. And I know, just to fill you in on the overall top 8, we have What the Buck and Q. They're playing their matchup currently, and Neurofuzz J Cho are playing in the quarterfinals. Bry Guy and Megan, Bry Guy and Q representing non-inkables, and the matchup you have on your screen now. So Waffles kicks things off with the Alanwi, and we have a Royal Guard to match here on turn 1. So Waffles, excuse me, on the play. And let's see if he has that ramp on turn 2. I don't know if it's of as high priority in this particular mirror match, but if you're on the play and you can get a 4 drop down early, that is always ideal. So instead, we are going with a second Elanwi, going on a quest, getting that first lore, and we'll see he's offering up the trade with that Royal Guard. Will Brandon take it? So piecing together his second turn. The early turns especially very important to sequence your ink in a way that won't affect you on future turns. We do see a Monstro inked for the turn, and that's something if I'm Waffles, I'm taking note of how many Monstros have I seen, how many have been placed in the inkwell. just to kind of prepare for the future if possible. So we do see that Huey that will offer a bit of ramp potentially on future turns. And Bagheera inked into the Cheshire Cat, so opting for the very powerful Cheshire Cat instead of just a 4/4 stat line here on turn 3 does Waffles. When you play that Huey on turn 2, you generally will want to play a 4-drop here on this turn 3. However, in the face of a Cheshire Cat, he might have different plans now. So just piecing together all the permutations of what could happen based on this decision here on the third turn. These early turns, sometimes they're very formulaic, and other times something as simple as a cat can drastically change your game plan going forward. We do see a Demona inked and just a pass of the turn, so if I'm Waffles, I'm pretty happy to see that overall. He could have something like Horseman Strikes in his hand that didn't have any potential targets. We do see Ursula, which maybe long term in the future could be a target for Horseman Strikes, but instead we're going to deploy the Dumbo. Looks like we're going on a quest with that Cheshire Cat. So now, even if he has the Horseman Strikes, he didn't use any of his ink on turn 3, which is not ideal whatsoever. So Waffle's off to a great start, adding to the board on each turn thus far, and both Cat and Dumbo are pretty significant threats that need answering. But we are going to quest with the Huey. It looks like we're going to play a 5-costed character here after that quest, and we do have the Hades looking for a deal. What is Waffles going to decide to do here with this Dumbo? It looks like immediately giving his opponent 2 cards, a pass back of the turn, and now if the Cat goes on a challenge for this Huey, or I suppose the Dumbo could as well. Dumbo would be protected from this Hades. So lots of options here. You could challenge with the cat and then immediately move 2 damage to the Hades to at least offer up a trade on the crackback. But we're going to start things out with drawing a card with this Dumbo, get some more information. Okay, we did have a swap of the screen, so unclear if I was getting the players' names wrong. But now on the left side of your screen, we have Horseman Strikes inked for the turn and Cheshire Cat deployed. So are we going to challenge? We do. So we take the Huey off the board and just offering up that Cheshire Cat for Hades as needed. So I believe Waffles is on the right side of your screen now, so apologies for that. But now Hades has some options here. I would expect him to challenge the Cheshire Cat, but a lot of that depends on the context of your hand. Carefully piecing together what this turn is going to look like. And starting with an ink of a Demona, we did see a second Monstro inked on the left side of your screen from Brandon. So definitely taking note of that overall. Now 2 Monstros have been used. Maybe the combo just overall less important in this mirror match, as we could see. Okay, yeah, I think we've swapped sides now because now the iPad lore totals aren't quite matching up. The player on the left side of your screen has 3 lore to 1 on the opposite side, but we're going to kick things off with another Hades that does in fact draw another 2 cards. So now challenging into that Cheshire Cat as expected, and pass back of the turn. All right, so Brandon, thinking about this next ink, he doesn't have a whole lot of cards left in his hand, but he does have that Dumbo available to draw additional cards as needed. And with no evasive characters on the opposing end, Dumbo is looking quite solid right now. We do see a second cat. And we are going to start out with drawing a card. I like this. Generally, if you're going to draw a card anyway, just try to gain the information at the start of your turn as it could impact further plays down the line, especially with ink decisions. Add that additional card. If it's inkable, that could certainly change what the rest of your game plan looks like for the turn. All right, inking that second cat, and we're going to play the Elsa, the fifth spirit, exert the second Hades. Now we have the opportunity to support onto the Elsa, challenge the Hades with no damage, and then also challenge the other Hades with the cat. Uh, could be quite an effective turn, or you can go this route. It really doesn't matter. I'd expect that Elsa to challenge as well. So the Elanwi was supporting onto the cat, into the new Hades, and then Elsa finishing off the Hades that already had 3 damage. And now you have a lot of damage to play around with the cat on the board, and Waffles is in some trouble here. So if you're just joining us, the lore totals are swapped on your screen. We do apologize for that. We'll see if we can get that straightened out. But we are underway. This is top 8 of the Winter Lorefest, day 2. But Brandon, on the left side of your screen, off to a good start here with the cat, the Elsa, the Dumbo, and Waffles really trying to piece together how do I come back from this? And this kind of shows you the downside of Hades looking for a deal. In both cases, he really just wanted to remove a character, but instead Brandon deciding, hey, I'll give you a couple cards. You're not going to be able to deal with this wide board. You generally will only have a 1-for-1 removal. And now we see You Know the Way, enter the Inkwell, into the Royal Guard. And what is the follow-up here? Exerting 5 more ink. It looks like an Elsa the Fifth Spirit, but we're thinking again. Just double checking what our options are here. And we do instead have Cheshire Cat. So just preemptively exerting that ink for that boost. But anytime you're boosting damage off an opposing character, that's certainly not ideal. So potentially he could move 1 damage off of this Elsa Fitzspirit onto the cat to banish the cat, and then leave some additional damage to play around with on future turns potentially. But really, this Dumbo is going to be a problem. He could move damage off the cat onto the Elsa just to prevent a draw from Dumbo, and it looks like that is in fact what he is going to prioritize, recognizing that the card advantage of Dumbo will just be too much to overcome. All right, Brandon, ready to go now? Looks like he has an Ursula in hand. He has Demona, which would allow him to challenge the other side of the board once those characters are exerted. And Waffles has a number of cards in hand. So when you have Demona and your opponent has Hades, well, that makes sense. You just give them the cards. They're going to be that prevents them from drawing cards in the future from that Demona, but instead opting for the Genie Wish Fulfilled. Brandon, thinking about the follow up, he is going to go ahead and activate Dumbo, break some records, draw a card. He has not inked for the turn yet. All right, looks like we're trying to get the lore situation straightened out. All right, perfect. So 6-2 now. Believe we got that all straightened out here in game one of the top eight. Brandon inks the Horseman Strikes. I don't believe we've seen a single character on the opposing side of the board that has been evasive, so just hasn't had an opportunity. We're going to move 1 damage over to the Royal Guard. Waffles can, of course, move it back potentially to this Amanwi with his own Cheshire Cat. But this Dumbo is the real problem here. Do we have a Horseman Strikes for this Dumbo? We have a grip full of cards in our hand, so we're going to have a lot of options on this turn. But he's keeping it close to the vest. Can't quite see. I did see him pick up the hand in between turns. It looked like there was at least a lantern in there. I see a Monstro. We've seen 2 Monstros inked already. So generally, we would want to keep that third one if possible to just potentially threaten the combo. Now, sure, Brandon has come out to a big lead here. He has few cards in hand with the Dumbo threatening for more. We see Alan Adale in the Inkwell, so that tells me maybe the combo is now offline for Waffles. Generally, these decks will only play 1 copy of Alan Adale, which is vital to that infinite combo. So I think he's just gonna try and win by natural means here, and we're looking at Nelson the Fifth Spirit. What are we gonna choose to exert? We could choose something like the cat, and then Elsa can go into the Dumbo. We can move some damage around. We could challenge the cat with both Royal Guard and our own Cheshire Cat. Those to me would be the two most threatening threats on the board of the opposition being the cat and the Dumbo. And we do have an opportunity to remove both of them here. But Genie can be threatening as well. So I think he's just trying to piece it together with the math here. We have yet to make the choice on the fifth spirit. And generally, I would think you want to take your time before you commit the Elsa, and kind of know exactly what's going to happen prior to playing it. Because if you're mapping it out at this point in time, it's certainly possible that maybe you don't in fact want to play that Elsa once you figure out what you want to choose. So we are in fact going to exert the Elanwi, and we're going to move some damage thanks to that boost ability of the Cheshire Cat to finish off that Dumbo. So recognizing that Dumbo certainly needed to get off the board, but now we've left ourselves in a position to where both the cat and the genie can threaten our characters back. I suppose we did take the Elanwi off the board, but we could challenge Genie into Elsa, move some damage with Cat, and then send our own cat into their cat. But then, of course, the Royal Guard can trade back. So, uh, really, just a chess match here thus far on trying to have board position. And now we see Brandon, I believe, draw his own lantern. Neither player deploying a lantern just yet, despite that being part of the primary game plan of these Amber Amethyst decks. We do see a number of cards, and it seems to me like Waffles. I don't have audio on the table, but it just based on body language, it seems like Brandon has been asking how many cards do you have in your hand on the last 2 turns. So if I'm Waffles, I'm saying, okay, he definitely has a Demona because that's the primary reason he would ask that. And we do see the Demona here. It's going to draw Brandon 1 card to get up to 3 after inking that Mowgli. But we still only have those 2 challengers. We can, of course, send that genie into the Elsa. We can activate cat now if we so choose. And the question is, do we want to challenge our cat and offer up essentially our cat for your cat and Royal Guard? And we are, in fact, going to challenge the cat. We see the Madame Mim elephant flipped over from that boost. And now Waffles has a lot of ink to work with. But Brandon has stemmed the bleeding and turned the tide on this game. Certainly in good position with that Lord lead, with that Demona on the board. A lot of times at this stage of the game in Amethyst Mirrors, you can see one player play a Demona, and then on the next turn, the opposing player play their own Demona to lock down yours, that sort of thing. But you don't always have that option. So we are, in fact, going to send that Royal Guard into the Cheshire Cat as a Fit Spirit and Rafiki are revealed underneath the Cheshire Cat after those couple boost abilities. We have another Royal Guard. And will we use that final 2 ink? There's the aforementioned Lantern. So passing back with what looks to be 4 cards, or maybe 3 actually. But either way, if Brandon has a second Demona, that wouldn't offer his opponent any cards, which is always ideal when Demona's involved. We do see a Lantern. So now on what is likely turn 8 or 9 of the game, we finally see both players deploying those lanterns. So not the ideal timing, but they still can make use of them at this point. We deploy the Royal Guard. Looks like we're looking at an Ursula. So Ursula here is interesting. It looks like he is going to boost, but one thing to consider, if your opponent has Horseman Strikes in your deck, or in their deck, maybe you want to wait a turn for that boost to prevent Ursula from being a potential target. But ultimately, Brandon deciding to use all of his ink for the turn, try to be as efficient as possible, get that boost taken care of, and now Waffles, let's see if he does have a Horseman Strikes. He could have a second cat also to send this genie and move that 2 damage back to the other genie. But instead, it looks like we might be seeing that third Monstro. We saw 2 inked early on, and we do, in fact, see the Monstro come down. And now what do we do with this Monstro? We saw the Allendale inked, so I believe the combo is turned off. If I'm Brandon, that's what I'm thinking. However, if Waffles were to discard a card here to ready the Monstro and protect it, I'd be a little concerned that maybe there's a second Alan the Dale in the deck or something like that. But we're gonna go ahead and ink the Rafiki, pass it back with just 1 card remaining, and we are looks like not going to discard to protect that Monstro. And now we're thinking about this genie. It's tough thing to turn sideways in the face of the Ursula. So we'll see what he ultimately decides here. He does decide to just pass back. So Brandon with 10 lore already, threatening 6 more on this turn with those evasive characters. So no punish for boosting the the Ursula. And now we're going to kick things off with a Dumbo. That genie is ready. So we are applying a lot of lore pressure by questing with something like the genie and the Ursula. However, we could just simply use it to draw additional cards thanks to Dumbo's ability, and we go ahead and do that. So we give up 1 lore for 1 card. A lot of the times that's a trade you're going to take. Brandon opting to send Royal Guard into the Monstro thanks to the genie drawing a card with Dumbo. Of course, Royal Guard having 3 strength to combine with the 5 damage already included. And if he needed any more strength, well, he had it rolled up thanks to this Junior Woodchuck's guidebook. So two more cards off the top. I believe the one remaining card prior to cracking the book was a Cheshire Cat, which is still quite good on this board. And we are going to quest 4-3 with that Ursula. And Waffles is going to have a tough time handling all these threats. Three opposing evasive characters, only one on his side of the board. And we are, in fact, going to pack it up. So, first game goes to B. Delenius or Brandon on the left side of your screen. Very impressive showing for him. And for Waffles, he just had a hard time catching up after the early stages of the game. Neither player notably having a ramp, and Waffles perhaps not prioritizing the combo aspect of his deck in this matchup, given the fact that we saw both two Monstros and an Allendale inked. But I don't have a ton of experience playing the Monstro combo version. I assume there's always going to be scenarios where you certainly have to just give up on the potential combo because a lot of your combo pieces are inkable. There's going to be scenarios where you just have to play a normal game and maybe ink some of those combo pieces. You know the way outside of the combo. Sometimes you can just run the gambit and play the lottery and get lucky. But a lot of times that's not going to be a very effective card outside of the combo itself. So we'll see what Waffles decides to do here going into game two in this mirror match of sorts, at least by color, with these Amethyst Amber strategies. Waffles with 7 cards and ready to go. Both players beginning their altar process. I do see a lantern from Brandon. We'll see if he decides to keep that one and have that turn two ramp potential. All right, looks like Waffles decides to keep 1 card, sending back 6. Meanwhile, Brandon with a 4 card altar, keeping 3, and I'm fairly confident Lantern was one of those keeps. So if you're Waffles, you really just want to curve out here and apply some pressure. That's something that he wasn't able to do in that first game. On turn two, I believe we just deployed a second Elanwi, which isn't ideal as opposed to something like a Lantern into a second Elanwi. That would be a lot more effective to allow for more powerful plays down the line. And we kind of saw the ineffectiveness of Hades making a deal. So we'll see how that plays out in this particular game. We are going to start by inking the Great Illuminary. So there's another sign that, hey, I'm sure he has multiple Great Illuminaries in his deck, but maybe recognizing that that card's not going to be effective until the late stages of the game if he can piece the combo pieces together. All right, so if I'm Brandon right there, there was a lot of hesitation on what's getting played on turn one, even after the ink was exerted. I'm thinking to myself, okay, he has at least one other one-costed character in hand that he was choosing between. But we see currently 2 dueling Murfikis, and now are we going to see Lantern into a one-drop, or maybe that second one-drop hits the inkwell instead? Well, we see the Monstro, so that's another combo piece and we are in fact going to see a Woodchuck's guidebook. So I do see a lantern in hand. It looks like 2 lanterns, in fact. So maybe Waffle's realizing, hey, I have some ramp in hand, but I really need some action. So opting for the guidebook instead. So these Rafikis are just kind of staring each other down at the moment. We're going to draw 2 cards with the guidebook. I do see a Hades looking for a deal drawn off the guidebook. We see second Rafiki inked for the turn into the lantern and a pass back. So realizing that a second Rafiki isn't going to add too much to this particular board, despite the fact that he could have played it with that lantern, would he have inked something else? I do see a Horseman Strikes as well. So if something like a Genie or a Dumbo is deployed here, he will have an opportunity to remove that from the board before it does any significant damage. And we do see the Horseman Strikes. A lot of times That's an exchange that neither player is too disappointed about, because it effectively was just my turn for your turn, as Waffles is unable to add anything to the board here. So, despite the fact that both players played a one drop on their turn one, no lore on either side, these Rafikis are effectively holding each other in check at the moment. We see Royal Guard inked for the turn, and now we have the powerful Elsa the Fifth Spirit is going to take down that Rafiki, and now we may have an opportunity for our Rafiki to quest, and we do, in fact, do just that to get on the board. So Brandon with that single lore. Now, how does Waffles fight back here? Has a number of cards to choose from in his hand, as there's been Guidebook and Horseman Strikes. Exerting 2 ink. We do have that second lantern as an option. We do see it there, and now potentially a 4-costed character. Or we could ink. We ink Iago, and now we're looking at the 5-costed character. It is Hades looking for a deal. Now, Hades has drawn 2 cards every time, something that's been common throughout this tournament. If you watched yesterday, Hades making a deal did, in fact, draw 2 cards just about every time it hit the playfield. So now if you're Brandon, we're going to kick things off with another Genie Wish Fulfilled. Draw that card. Evasive, so important in this matchup. Just really any Amethyst mirror match, whoever has the evasive advantage, especially if they can deploy a Dumbo in the near future, that you can see why Waffles was prioritizing trying to get that Elsa off the board. He doesn't have an opportunity to challenge it, and now this Genie is just yet another threat that needs to be answered. We do have another Horseman Strikes available. Horseman Strikes, of course, can't be played through the lantern, so we're going to start off with our own Genie Wish Fulfilled, draw that card, and then looks to be firing off the Horseman Strikes. Waffles, inking the Demona for the turn, and playing another one drop, and going for a quest with Hades. So offering it up should Brandon decide to double challenge with something like his Elsa and Rafiki, but that's certainly unlikely in the face of that Genie Wish Fulfilled. So recognizing that he can get that one lore there fairly safely. Of course, anytime you're playing an Amethyst Mirror, a Cheshire Cat can change the math quite significantly. I do believe I see a second Elsa Fifth Spirit in hand for Brandon. That would give him an opportunity to potentially play that second Elsa, exert the Genie, and double challenge into the Genie if he so chooses. We have set the ink aside to do just that in combination with that lantern, but what will we decide to do? We're going to ink a Demona. Both players with pretty full hands, recognizing that Demona not quite going to shine in this position. We do instead deploy the Elsa as expected and challenge the Genie. So this is kind of the war that you have with Amethyst Mirrors, just fighting the evasive battles, and this Royal Guard and the Hades are going to be unable to challenge back. Waffles, I believe, Drew, you know the way for the turn, but we're going to start out with a character with the help of the Lantern. Let's deploy the Genie, draw a card. We do have a cat available. Cat is always at its best when you can get immediate value, both playing and boosting in the same turn. He could ink and do that, but his only opportunity to remove a character would be moving 2 damage off the Elsa onto the Rafiki, which isn't generally the exchange you're looking for. So he does ink the You Know the Way. We do, in fact, play a cat. We are going to boost, and we do go ahead and remove that Rafiki. So recognizing, hey, I can get at least one character off the board, guarantee value from this Cheshire Cat. It might not be the perfect scenario for cat, but still always nice anytime you have an opportunity to remove a character. So 3 cards remaining in the hand of Waffles. So if Brandon has a Demona on this turn, would prevent any additional card draw. But Demona is always at its best when you have multiple characters to challenge, and of course the Elsas could do some challenging into that genie if you were able to deploy Demona, but then the cat would kind of have a field day on the way back. So we start out with our own Genie Wish Fulfilled, and as you can see in this matchup, it's really just card draw and challenging so far. Not a lot of questing. Each player's with just 2 lore. We're going to ink Bagheera and play an Iago. So outside of Horseman Strikes, which is really just as effective against an Iago as any other evasive characters, I don't know that Waffles has any opportunity to answer this Iago nice and easy. So we will go questing with those 2 Elsas. So now if you're Waffles, you have an opportunity to challenge an Elsa, move some damage with the cat, should you so choose. But in the face of an Iago, is that what you want to do? Only 2 cards remaining for Brandon on the left side of your screen. If you're just joining us, this is top 8, day 2 of the Winter Lorefest, an Amber Amethyst Mirror. Brandon on the left side of your screen, up a game. Waffles thinking carefully. He has 9 ink and 2 lanterns. So lots of options for this turn. Or sorry, 7 ink with the lanterns up to 9. But we're going to start things out with the notebook, or the workbook, excuse me. Drawing 2 cards, which of course will just add to his potential options for the turn. Using the lanterns. 5 total with the lantern. We do see Elsa Fifth Spirit exert that genie. And now we're going to see some challenging. So 2 damage into the genie. I don't believe have inked for the turn, so we do have an opportunity to ink and move damage with the Cheshire Cat. We're going to do just that, but it does come at a cost. A second Cheshire Cat into the Inkwell, one of the better cards in the matchup. But we are able to guarantee to finish off the genie here. Now, what do we want to do with this second genie? I can't challenge effectively. You could go ahead and quest. Maybe you think that this Iago and Elsa are going to combine to remove my Elsa already, or do I just want to quest and guarantee some lore with this genie? He quests with the Hades, perhaps offering the Iago to go into the Hades, and we are also going to send in with the Royal Guard. So getting a little aggressive here, getting on the board with a few additional lore, facing down all these evasive characters. Tied up with lore, 4-4. And we're still thinking about this genie. We are, in fact, going to send it in. So basically, Brandon has plenty of options when it comes to challenging back here. And this is a situation, I know he doesn't have the cat on the board right now, but if he were able to add one, that would add to his advantage quite a bit. But we'll see what he has here. And for Waffles, to his credit, he may be thinking, look, you might have a Demona anyway. So in the face of a potential Demona, I'm going to quest and make sure I get some lore first. Brandon doesn't appear to have a cat. It looks like he does have a guidebook, however. So does he want to draw some cards first before making any other decisions? I believe that's what he's thinking through at the moment. Deciding to ink the Dumbo. So that tells me he's planning on using all of his ink for the turn. However, are we going to use this guidebook? Maybe later. No, we're just going to empty our hand for Demona. Makes sense. We're going to draw 3 cards. Meanwhile, for Waffles, doesn't draw any cards. So yeah, that extra lore could prove to be vital with that Demona coming down. Brandon was going to be able to challenge quite a bit anyway. Let's use that one additional ink for Alonwi. It's always good when you play Demona and fill up to 3 to try to use at least one of those 3 cards. That way, if your opponent uses something like Elsa the Fifth Spirit to exert your Demona, well, at least you would get to ready it in that scenario. However, sometimes you just get stuck with the 3 and you don't have an opportunity to use any of the cards immediately. But in this case, Brandon did draw the 1-drop with only 1 ink remaining with the Elanwi. So definitely a lot of damage done with those challenges, and Brandon's still threatening so much more with a book on the table ready to go for a future turn. The Elan we can get in the mix and make challenging even more profitable. Meanwhile, for Waffles, only one evasive character at his disposal to do any challenging. Royal Guard can be very impressive at certain stages of the game, but right here, he's trying to piece it together. Does he have his own Demona? Demona working quite well with Royal Guard, but then again, it would only be up to 5 power if he were to able to draw all 3 cards, and it's unclear if he can use all of his hand prior to playing the Demona like we saw Brandon do on the previous turn. So 8 ink total plus the 2 lanterns. Plenty of options for Waffles on this turn. Thinking carefully. I believe I see a cat and an elephant. We are going to challenge into the Elsa the Fifth Spirit and play another cat. We're going to move some damage. I don't believe we can remove a character with the damage. Well, I was thinking of the evasive characters. My apologies. We do go ahead and remove the Alanwi with that Cheshire Cat boost ability. And now what are we going to decide to do with this Hades? Considering a quest, but backing off for now. Adding the Great Illuminary. So the Great Illuminary says pay 1 cost to put a character into this location and it gains exert to draw a card. So he could effectively turn this Hades, instead of a lord, turn it into a card. And if he so chooses, he can also move this Royal Guard in and draw an additional card for the turn. Now, Great Illuminary, very strong card if you can draw a bunch of cards immediately. However, you are making those characters vulnerable. And Illuminary itself, only 3 willpower, so fairly easy to remove in a challenge if Brandon decides to go that route. But we are going to cash in that Royal Guard for a card he's been studying at the Great Illuminary. We ink the elephant. Do we have a follow-up? No. So really, really minor thing. I expect Great Illuminary to not be on the board when Waffles begins his next turn. However, it's not impossible, right? So we did have 2 ink remaining at the end of that turn. We could have moved both the Elsa and the Cheshire Cat into the Illuminary as it doesn't come at any cost, given that Waffles won't be able to use that 2 remaining ink on the opposing turn. As you could tell, he immediately readied his ink, which some players tend to do to attempt to save some time. We are going to crack the book, draw 2 cards. Now Brandon with a fistful of cards after the Demona on the previous turn into the book on this turn. He's drawn at least 4 cards. Back-to-back turns, or just 3 this turn. But hey, the turn's not over. He could have a Dumbo. He could have a Genie Wish Fulfilled. He could have another book. Maybe he'd surprise me and have a Great Illuminary himself. He did, in fact, have another book, but decides, hey, I've got enough cards for now. Let me go ahead and put that in the inkwell. We do see Alan and Dale in hand for Waffles to go with an Elsa the Fifth Spirit. There is a third card. Can't quite pick up what that may be. Meanwhile, Brandon with an Elanwi, another book. So that's the third book we've seen over the course of 2 turns, and a Demona as well. So perhaps trying to set up for a Demona on the following turn, if possible. But taking quite a few actions prior to doing any challenging, recognizing, hey, I want as much information as possible before I decide what I'm going to do with all of these challengers. We have a second lantern we can use to finish off all of our ink for the turn. We do decide to do that. And can we use the lanterns for anything? Looks like we can. We have another Elanwi to add to the board. All right. So now what do? We can send Iago into the Illuminary. We could send Demona into the Hades, perhaps. We could send Elsa into the Royal Guard. Lots of permutations of all of those options. So we do start out with removing the Great Illuminary. Elsa into Royal Guard. Now this Demona, it could quest, could challenge this Hades. We do go ahead and decide to answer as much on the opposing side of the board as possible. Things are looking pretty good for Brandon, who is up a game in this best of 3 matchup here in top 8. So we have Cat Boost available. We could, of course, remove some damage to remove the Elanwi. But we start out by inking Elsa the Fifth Spirit. Does that mean we have a Demona coming here? All right, we do in fact have 6 ink put together. Oh no, we're going to start with Alan-a-Dale. And now I think we're going to see the Demona. In fact, we have 1 card remaining, so that draws 2. Meanwhile, Brandon able to draw up to 3 as well. So that does lock down the opposing Demona. And now we have some options of what to do with the cat. So we could challenge the Elanwi. Yeah, put 2 damage on our cat, move 2 damage to the Elsa. That looks to be the most effective play. Oh, instead, leaving damage on the cat and going ahead and removing that Elsa that way instead. Maybe realizing the Iago can can go ahead and challenge this Cheshire Cat either way. However, I'm not sure. Okay, I kind of see what this might be doing here. You want to remove damage available to move from his own Demona should he have a follow-up Cheshire Cat. That's potentially the line of thinking there. But as is, if he had a second cat, he could now deploy it, move 2 damage off of the Iago to answer your cat. We do have a World's Greatest Criminal Mind, which is one of the best answers in the game to an opposing Demona. But we're going to start things out with a Hades looking for a deal. And this is kind of a cat and mouse game. You could choose that Demona knowing that you have the World's Greatest Criminal Mind in hand already, if you in fact want 2 cards. But he does go ahead and choose the Cheshire Cat, which was already available to get challenged anyway. So he's thinking, hey, I don't want to give you 2 cards when you're just going to be able to answer this Cheshire Cat no matter what I decide to do here. So that does allow an opportunity for the Iago to simply quest instead of that challenge, and it leaves Iago on the board, of course. We could also see Iago sing a song. Could sing World's Greatest Criminal Mind. We do have an Ursula available to us. We do, in fact, deploy the Ursula, and we are going to sing that song, removing the Demona from play. So Alan Adale awfully lonely on the side of Waffles. Draws for the turn. Can he potentially piece together the combo with Alan Adale already in play? Brandon said, look, I don't find your Alan Adale all that threatening. He perhaps had some options. He could have deployed something like a Demona to exert it, to guarantee that it's removed from play, but ultimately decides, hey, I'm going to leave it here. I'm not too worried. You would have to have Monstro and wait a turn for Great Illuminary to combine with the Monstro to get Alan Adale to be super threatening. We ink that Lantern for the turn. We're going to start off with a 1-drop, it looks like. Deploy the Rafiki, ink the Cheshire Cat. Okay, there's the Great Illuminary. Do we have Monstro? We have Circle of Life for Demona. So that's going to exert a handful of characters, and each player drawing up to 3 cards. So Waffles giving his opponent a few cards there, using all of his ink to ultimately end up with a Demona in play that will lock down the opposing Demona, at least for now. Okay, we have 2 ink remaining. We're going to use it in combination with the Lantern and 1 ink to deploy the Huey. Now, Alan Adale doesn't really have much to do. It's the only character that is available to challenge. We're just going to go ahead and pass back. So now this Great Illuminary is available to simply be challenged by something like the Hades or the Iago, should Brandon choose to do so. We do have that Ursula. We did have an ink available last turn, so perhaps playing around the Horse of Strikes in this case, not boosting. Ursula, one of the cards that really doesn't gain any additional bonus by being boosted multiple times. Once you boost that single time, it's good to go. We ink a Hades. Do we have another Demona that's coming here? We're going to play, I believe that's our 4th book of the game that's either reached the inkwell or the discard pile. Yeah, we are going to go ahead and play a Demona here as we are able to empty our hand, play that Demona. That will, of course, exert all the opposing characters, giving his opponent just 1 card compared to his 3 in this scenario. So now we kind of have the pick of the litter. We could challenge all the characters, leaving the Great Illuminary in play with the Demona, which will be locked down. We could, of course, just start questing and applying additional pressure. If it were me, I would probably want to get Alanadale off the board just in case there's any sort of permutation of the combo that could surprise you. But ultimately, getting Great Illuminary off the board is of high priority as well. We do, in fact, challenge the Alanadale with the Ursula, and we still have the Hades available. It could challenge either the Rafiki or the Huey. That Demona, of course, will not be readying. That is our second ink of the turn. Okay, we're gonna back that up. Players caught it immediately. Maybe a brief conversation with the judge there. And we do just pass back for the turn. So I wonder what his plan there was, as it looked like he was going to ink and have 3 ink remaining. Maybe a cat was going to be deployed. But ultimately, I don't believe he was able to get under 3 cards. So perhaps he was just trying to get under 3 cards to allow him to ready this Demona on a future turn. For Waffles, of course, starting with 3 himself, unable to ready his own Demona, drawing up to 4. It looks like Hades looking for a deal at the front of his hand and unable to challenge either the Iago or the Ursula. Ursula, of course, has been boosted and has evasive. We're going to start off with the Hades looking for a deal, choosing that Ursula as it's just threatening so much lore, but immediately getting 2 cards in the exchange. And you could see Amethyst decks just never run out of cards. And Demona has a lot to do with that. Demona changed the formula for Amethyst so much to where sometimes you actually prioritize emptying your hand as quickly as possible in order to play a Demona on curve and then just immediately refill. And then you have cards like Junior Woodchuck's Guidebook, as well as things like Hades and Dumbo and Genie Wish Fulfilled. Really, we've seen these players, despite having so much ink throughout the game, still continuing to want to ink because they recognize that they're just going to continue to draw cards, and if not their own Demonas, their opponents. And if Waffles doesn't have his another Demona on this turn, he might be trying to piece together, hey, do I want to challenge this opposing Demona that already has 1 damage on it? He does have an opportunity to do just that. And we are going to draw some cards off the Junior Woodchuck's Guidebook. I know Rafiki versus Royal Guard is a hotly contested conversation in Amethyst circles on which one is better a lot of the time. However, in this case, you can see that Royal Guard would be better than that Rafiki because that Huey would still be around, but instead, both have to combine for that challenge. We did see the Ursula exert the Demona, so neither Demona, well, sorry, we just removed one from the board, but that Demona I don't believe will be readying at the start of Brandon's turn, as he does, in fact, have 3 cards in hand. Right, he was about to pass the turn, but now thinking about this Elsa. Elsa has an opportunity to challenge. However, it can't challenge anything and actually remove it from the board. But we are going to go ahead and opt to get some additional damage on this Ursula while we have the chance. Demona, I don't believe should be ready, but maybe I'm not quite seeing the hand size correctly. Okay, there we go. So Waffle's offering up his Elsa. If I'm Brandon, I'm sending this Iago into that Elsa almost every time. Maybe if I'm at 19 lore, maybe in that case I decide to quest. But that 2 damage could prove to be important as he does just go ahead and use the Horseman Strikes instead and valuing that lore that the Iago could provide. So Brandon has been slow to gain lore in this game, but as far as board advantage, firmly ahead at this point. All right, we have a cat and now a second cat with lots of ink available. It looks like 3. We could ink for the turn and activate both cats, should we so choose. And Brandon really just dominating at this stage of the game. Mowgli's not going to be too effective. So let's get that in the inkwell. Boost up the cat. Where are we moving damage from? Let's start with this Ursula, that extra 2 damage that went on to the Ursula. Moved over to Demona. Now we are going to boost an additional 2 damage onto that Demona yet again, and finally finish it off with the Royal Guard. And really no harm in questing at this point. 4 lore. Let's make it 5 with the Hades. Up to 9 is Brandon. And what is Waffles going to do to fight back here? Facing down 2 cats, an Ursula that's boosted, an Iago, and a Demona that is ready to be readied up on the following turn. Let's kick things off with a Great Illuminary. Looks like a desperation time. Maybe send in the Rafiki in there to start. We have 3 cards. We're looking at our discard pile. Can we combo from this position after adding Great Illuminary? The way that Waffles is looking through that discard, maybe he's trying to piece together just that. But I believe Monstro has to be ready for a turn cycle to allow for Waffles to draw through his entire deck with the help of the Great Luminary. We're going to start by moving the Hades in. Let's draw a card. What did we find? All right, let's try this again. Rafiki into the Illuminary. Draw another card. Now what can we do? Brandon threatening 9 lore if he were to quest with everything currently on the board. So Waffles just about guaranteed at least 1 additional turn. We see the lanterns come to play here. Thinking carefully. Must be a 2 ink character. No, let's back it up. All right, what is the plan to try to come back from such a difficult position, being quite behind a retrosphere? Okay, let's add Monstro to the board. Monstro can challenge this Hades. It does, in fact, do just that. And we are going to go ahead and bounce the Cheshire Cat with that retrosphere. Of course, that comes with an extra card, thanks to the Cheshire Cat already having been boosted. So Retrosphere is a 1-cost item that you can pay 2 to banish it and return chosen character, item, or location with cost 3 or less to their player's hand. So not the most effective against a Cheshire Cat. With so much ink to work with, we get an additional card, we can redeploy, we can move some damage off of this Iago. So lots of options still available for Brandon here. We can start things off with the book, but instead we are going to play the cat. And now with two cats available, two boosts available, what can we do? We can move 3 damage total off of our Iago to the Monstro, but that wouldn't finish it off quite yet. We are starting with 2 of that damage, and we're just going to send the Iago to finish it off. So now are we going to prioritize removing the Great Illuminary at all? I would lean towards yes. I'm not too concerned about the two characters being the Hades and the Rafiki, but I would potentially want to remove that Great Illuminary. We do deploy a second Ursula, which just adds to the lore pressure for Brandon on future turns. We will challenge the Great Illuminary, so that may come at a cost because, of course, that Rafiki and the Hades can challenge back now into the cat. All right, looking at Waffle's hand, starting with just 2 cards, I see a Demona, a Huey, and a Mowgli. So we could see both of those cards deployed, or maybe just inking the Mowgli. Maybe you don't want to remove a card from Brandon's hand prior to playing the Demona. And he agrees, just inking the Mowgli. Let's draw 3 with that Demona. So the Demona battles just continue as Brandon is able to add 1 card to his hand up to 3, and now his Demona is locked down for a turn. Okay, we do have Horseman Strike, so that boosted Ursula is taken care of, and Horseman Strikes was under the boost. So if I'm Waffles, I'm pretty happy about that. And now we see the challenge into the Cheshire Cat that was made vulnerable thanks to its own challenge into the Great Luminary. All right, 2 ink now. Just another lantern. And we're going to pass back with 2 cards remaining in our turn. So even though that was quite a good turn for Waffles, with this 1 Ursula remaining, that's still quite a bit of lore pressure. Brandon already up to 12, threatening up to 16 on this turn. We're going to start things off with a Genie Wish Fulfilled. Draw a card. We have our own Mowgli. With 2 cards remaining, they really could be just about anything, as Waffles didn't have any ink to work with at the end of the previous turn. I guess you could guarantee it's not a 1 drop because we did have this 1 ready lantern at our disposal. We go ahead and play a Dumbo into the Elsa. Elsa exerts a Demona, however, there is only 2 cards in the hand of Waffles, so if we're not able to challenge this Demona down, it will go ahead and ready on the next turn. Busting for 3 with that Ursula. We sent the Elsa into the Hades to finish it off. And now passing back to Waffles. So what do we have to work with? Just 3 cards. I see an Elsa the Fitzbear, another Demona. It's just Demona wars back and forth. These players have to, their decks have to be getting pretty slim at this stage of the game, and we do in fact see that Elsa inked because hey, I'm gonna or I'm gonna exert everything. Let me play the Demona or the Monstro first, excuse me, into that Demona, exert everything. I'm gonna have 3 cards to work with. What can we do now with Monstro and all those cards? Well, 4 of the 6 exerted characters on the opposing side of the board are, of course, evasive, but we did draw a Horseman Strikes. That handles one. That Ursula being quite threatening, but do we have an answer? As there's four evasive lore threatening on the opposing side, we're going to go ahead and answer the cat. We could ready the Monstro and answer the Demona as well. However, that's not 100% necessary due to the fact that, of course, there are three cards in hand for Brandon. So are we going to do some questing ourselves? It looks like that may be the case. We do, in fact, quest for three. We're up to 9. Just four lore threatening for Brandon. Can he find a way to finish this off? But we're not done. Well, there's our second ink for the turn yet again. So both players at this stage of the game attempting to ink a second time, but no, we're going to back that up and just play or just discard to the Monstro, ready it up, protect it, and let's pass back with 2 turns. So whether he wanted to make sure that Monstro can't be challenged or not, he does remove a card from his hand to allow for the existing Demona to ready on his turn, assuming there isn't even more Demonas on the side of Brandon. I haven't been keeping track. I don't know if maybe that's a 4 on each side now. There has been quite a few. All right, let's start by cracking the book, drawing some more cards. We do see another Ursula. Ursula has been very, very effective in this matchup. We could see some Dumbo activations as well on this turn. Go ahead and ink the Mowgli. Here comes the Ursula. That looked like 6 ink exerted, so you could go ahead and boost here, but we're going to go ahead and play Bagheera. That's a card we've seen in the Inkwell quite a bit, but have not necessarily seen it in action all that much. But we do go ahead and boost the Ursula. And now we are going to activate that Dumbo to draw a card. So it's going to get 1 lore either way, whether questing or drawing an additional card. So in this case, opting to draw that card. And it looks like we have 2 cards remaining. You may want to stay with just 2 thanks to that Demona. So we do decide to just go and finish off some questing. So now, Brandon, up to 19. Can Waffles do anything to possibly come back from this position? We're going to start off 3 ink, just draw 2 cards, looking for any potential answers. Genie, let's look at one more. I'd be hard pressed to think of possible combination of cards that can answer all of these threats on the opposing side of the board. However, a week from today, Raging Storm could be an answer in this situation for these Amber decks. So that is going to change the scope of the format quite significantly once you add Raging Storm to the mix. Players just can't completely dump their hands and have these Demona advantages, and that is going to do it. B. Delenius or Brandon with the decisive 2-0 victory here in the top 8 matchup of the Winter Lorefest Day 2. So I guess we knew either way Amethyst Amber would be advancing, but in this case, it's going to be the Amethyst Amber mid-range strategy. No Monstro combo to be found in this deck list. And we saw in this particular matchup, it didn't look like a place where the combo really shines, as it was really just a battle of board control and evasive control and card advantage and Demonas. So Monstros occasionally came in and challenged 1 or 2 characters, but ultimately not factoring in as far as his combo potential. So congratulations to B. Delenius advancing to our top 4. All right, welcome back to the booth. Happy to have you here. Winter Lorefest Day 2. We will continue our coverage with the semifinals approaching. Anybody out in chat land, if you want to talk about winter spell cards, now's the time to do it. There's a lot I'm excited about, especially in both of these colors. I know Amber uh, has a lot of potential with a lot of new cards. We've seen how effective Lantern is in a lot of these decks. Are we going to see Grandmother Willow replace it potentially? Are we going to see a number of the other cards? I mentioned Raging Storm. If you had just maybe one or two Raging Storms in your deck, how different does this mirror match look? It could be quite significant. So remains to be seen. Raging Storm, such an interesting card, especially for players who have been used to be prepared and playing since the early stages of the game. It's a very different card in a different color, an environment where it won't be able to be sung. So it remains to be seen how effective and impactful Raging Storm will be. And it's one of those cards where even if it's not played in high numbers, players just have to respect it. And it will certainly play out in gameplay. And it's one of those things, maybe you just play one, a cheeky one of Raging Storm. That way, if they see it in a best of three, they really have to consider it the whole way. Now, something like Open Deckless can change the strategy in that regard. But really curious how much Raging Storm will be seeing in the near future. We are going to take a quick break here prior to the top four matchup, so stick around. We will be back in just a few moments, but happy to have you here at Winter Lorefest Top 8. All right, we are back here for top four. We have Bry Guy on the right side of your screen with Amethyst Steel up against the Sapphire Emerald deck. We saw a little bit yesterday, but haven't seen it since. So now, two of the powerhouses in the metagame represented here in the top four. Bry Guy represented by Team Non-Inkables. Meanwhile, Ink Shop and Neurofuzz on the left side of your screen. Non-inkables well represented in this tournament. Two players in the tournament, two players in top eight. But now Bry Guy into top four, ready to kick us off. This is a matchup where, depending on who you ask, you might get different answers on who is advantaged. I've played a handful of Amethyst Steel myself. Usually feels pretty good, but Emerald Sapphire is so powerful, so strong. They just have some combinations of starts that are just unbeatable, regardless of what you are playing on the opposing side of the board. And that's what just makes it so effective against a wide metagame. As Neurofuzz is going to kick us off with that on the play advantage, we see the turn one Clarabelle. So these Emerald Sapphire decks looking for Clarabelle into a ramp, into a potential turn four shift. And if something like your welcome gets in the mix, that can be quite scary for the opposition. So we are just getting started. This is top four. I do see those two lore pips from the previous round, so we'll get that cleaned up as this is game one of this top four matchup. And of course, every Sapphire deck wants the turn two ramp, and we have it here with the Sail the Azurite Sea into inking that Kita for the turn. Meanwhile, if you're a Bry guy, you really just want to curve out with Amethyst Steel, have a 2-drop into a 3-drop. However, if you're going into the Clarabelle shift turn and you have a bunch of 1-drops in hand, well, you have to consider maybe just trying to empty your hand as much as possible. We do see something like Genie Witch Fulfilled. That doesn't particularly shine here, especially on the draw. So it looks like he may be prioritizing, or maybe just didn't have a 2-drop in this scenario, but adding another Captain Hook to the board. So if you're Neurofuzz, we have a vision of the future, perhaps looking for that Clarabelle shift line. But ultimately, if I'm Bry Guy, I'm not too disappointed knowing there isn't going to be something like a Cinderella added to the board on this turn. This, of course, could be the detectives variety, but we haven't seen any sign of that. In fact, we saw Akita inked on the previous turn, which of course could have been Neurofuzz's 4-drop on this turn after the Sail the Azurite Sea, but instead opting for that vision of the future, recognizing, hey, I need to find the right cards in this spot to really apply maximum pressure to my opponent. We're going to improvise just a cycle, draw a card off the top. We could, in fact, challenge this Captain Hook thanks to the improvise, but will we decide to do that? I suppose maybe you'd consider it if you do not have that big Clarabelle in hand, but I still would find it fairly unlikely. So we do ink for the turn. We do have a second Clarabelle, so that does make it more likely, saying, hey, you got to answer both of them. I might as well give one up just to prevent you gaining additional lore on future turns. Now, in this scenario, this Captain Hook can go back into the Clarabelle should it so choose. All right, now Bry Guy on to his third turn. We saw an improvise already from the Emerald deck. Does that mean you would find less priority in something like this Iago that we see pulled to the front of the hand? If I see an improvise, I'm scared of playing an Iago. Thinking carefully, what do we want to do here? inking that Jafar for turn and then into the giant Cobra. Now you're facing the potential Clarabelle shift. Do we discard a card to this Cobra? We are, in fact, going to do just that. Gain 2 lore. That's something that maybe he wouldn't want to do unless he is facing down that Clarabelle shift line potential. So, does Neurofuzz have it? Of course, there's only 3 cards remaining in Bryguy's hand, so even if he were to do something like ink into Clarabelle, as it stands, it would draw 1 card. But of course, if you have something like a You're Welcome in the mix, that would change things significantly. We do see that inked big Clarabelle. That means there has to be a second. There it is. But only 2 cards remaining. Do we have the follow-up? We do have Malicious, Mean, and Scary that answers 1 threat on the board in that Captain Hook that already had 1 damage on it. And so that does allow us to draw up to 3 cards. And Clarabelle's a card that is just so scary if you can't answer it right away. We've seen the Clarabelle already draw 2 cards effectively for Neurofuzz, and there is unlikely to be a clean answer here. We do see these Amethyst Steel decks occasionally play cards that will boost a card's challenger or give a card challenger 2 for the turn. If you have that here, it would be perfect to allow the Giant Cobra to exchange for the Clarabelle, but instead, just a pass back with that Iago added to the board. So still 2 cards remaining. Can Neurofuzz empty some of these cards from his hand in order to allow this Clarabelle to get more advantage in the future? We do see Mother Knows Best resolved, and that can be a tricky ruling sometimes with those vanished characters, but the action does resolve first prior to the vanish trigger. That in that case causes the card to be returned to hand in that Iago. So once again, the Clarabelle has now drawn 3 cards total off the top, and Bryguy still not with a clean answer for the Clarabelle as it stands. So in a tough position, and now Neurofuzz will be going into his 7 ink turn, which turns on a number of strong plays from the Amethyst Emerald side, or excuse me, Sapphire Emerald side. Some decks play Hades, some don't. We're going to kick things off with a Genie, which I believe that's been in our hands since the opener, but not at its best in this matchup, especially on the draw when facing down that Clarabelle line. We do opt to ink the Iago this time, and looks like we will be passing back with these 3 cards in hand. What do we do with this Cobra? Do we want to challenge and just get some damage on this Clarabelle? No, ultimately we decide to just pass back and send it back to Neurofuzz, who does ink that Tipo immediately, getting up to that 7 ink marker. We could see something like a Basil here, maybe even a John Silver, Hades. There's a number of large characters that could be deployed at this point that would be quite effective. Neurofuzz weighing this option. This is a top 4 matchup at the Winter Lorefest, and there's some excellent prizes up top in this tournament. The winner will be getting 6 boxes and a pretty good variety of boxes because you do get 2 Winter Spell boxes. So immediately you are going to get those new cards. However, we see Bend to My Will. That wasn't on my radar as a 7 ink play, especially with that Clarabelle in play. You're saying, look, I'm not going to be able to empty my hand to get more value out of this Clarabelle, so I'm going to go ahead and empty your hand instead. And we do see the Demona and 2 Strength of a Raging Fires removed. And now what can we do? We could double challenge this Clarabelle. We're going to start things off by boosting and moving 1 damage off the Cobra. However, if we challenge anyway, that won't make too much of a difference. And we know that Bryguy is now working with no hand available. We are going to go ahead and just quest with the genie and the cobra recognizing, hey, I need to win with lore. I need to try to push that lore advantage. This Clarabelle isn't going to draw you any cards. I have no cards in my hand. I want to keep this genie on the board to apply future lore pressure. We do see a second Clarabelle. Now, Clarabelles don't necessarily work too well in a team, as both abilities will trigger. However, once one has resolved, well, the second one isn't going to change anything. Inking malicious mean and scary, which would tell me that it's unlikely there's a big Prince Philip in hand, but still prioritizing an ink, despite having a fairly low hand size total. So now deciding what do I do with this Clarabelle? I suppose I said they don't work well in teams. Well, you could potentially just challenge with this Cobra and say, look, if you want to challenge back with a Genie or Cheshire Cat, I'm thrilled. But no, we have your welcome. That makes perfect sense. So now, empty-handed is Neurofuzz, and now we're going to force Bragai to draw two cards, and we are going to draw two cards on our own turn. Right, pass back, draw two off the top. And if you're Bragai, as much as that stinks to, be forced essentially to give your opponent two cards, considering you were empty-handed, you're probably not too disappointed to add some cards to your hand as well. But it did remove that Genie from play, and now we have Hades. Hades does not work too well against an opposing Clarabelle. As expected, two cards added to the hand. Can we find something? Even a Strength of a Raging Fire here sung wouldn't be very effective. We could ink and play a Palace Guard just to lower our hand size. I believe I saw a Palace Guard in the hand. I guarantee you these two players have played this matchup on both sides a number of times as these two decks. If you're bringing Amethyst Seal to a big tournament, you know that you're going to have to face against this Emerald Sapphire Menace and vice versa. But as it stands, Emerald Sapphire looking pretty firmly advantaged. However, the lore advantage is in favor of Bragai, and sometimes that can add up quite quickly, especially when you have things like Giant Cobra in your deck. But we're going to kick things off by developing our brain, looking at the top two, selecting one of those to add to our hand. And with two cards remaining in hand for Bragai, can we empty our hand potentially to add more with these Clarabelle triggers? And he has offered up something like a Cheshire Cat, which can be quite valuable should Clarabelle choose to challenge. We ink a Sail the Azurite Sea, now exerting 6 ink for that Basil, or 7, excuse me. Looked like he turned 6 sideways, but either way, yeah, that was 7. We are going to remove the Cheshire Cat, just bounce it back to hand, and we go ahead and challenge the Cobra. Now we're going in for a quest. So both Clarabelles turn sideways, 3 cards in hand. We're going to draw a couple more cards off of that Clarabelle. So I believe that's been 5 or 6 cards total drawn by that Clarabelle. It actually might be more because of the You're Welcome on the previous turn. So the inability to be able to answer these Clarabelles has cost Bragai so much in this particular matchup and any opportunity to maintain a significant advantage. Going to start things off with that Olaf. We of course know we have the Cheshire Cat available, but what can it do in the face of all of these high willpower characters? Nothing you challenge will live to tell the tale with any damage remaining. So you could move 1 damage off of Clarabelle onto the other Clarabelle, but that still won't finish it off. We could move a single damage and then challenge with the Palace Guard. That doesn't sound too bad, but we're going to go ahead and play the Cobra, discard that Dumbo, and maybe we're not challenging at all. Guy recognizing, hey, I need to finish this game as soon as possible. These Clarabelles are just going to continue to draw cards, but he wisely empties his hand in the face of both Clarabelle and the Basil, which of course could cause a discard should it choose to quest. So Guy essentially saying, look, these are the cards I've been dealt. This is what's on the board. You need to deal with it now. I am the aggressor in the matchup. Neurofuzz piecing together his turn. He's going to start things off by inking that Prince Philip. We haven't seen any Prince Philips added to the board in the game thus far. And Prince Philip here, the big Prince Philip, wouldn't be effective unless, of course, you have Malicious, Mean, and Scary. But if we had that combo rolled up, I assume we would have seen it already in order to remove all the characters. However, Malicious Mean and Scary sometimes with Olaf in play can make things a little tricky, as the Malicious Mean and Scary would resolve first, and then the Olaf would trigger, and that would allow Guy to potentially bounce a character prior to the Prince Philip coming down. But we are going to play a John Silver, give Cheshire Cat Reckless for the turn, and then a Cinderella could potentially filter out that final remaining card in the hand of Neurofuzz. We are going to challenging that Hades, recognizing that he needs to remove some lore from the opposing side of the board, and both of those Clarabelles able to challenge and stick around with that damage on them. And we're going to go on a quest with the Basil. Now, we could quest with the Cobra, draw for a turn, of course, and then challenge with the Olaf into one of these Clarabelles, return the Cobra, and then play the Cobra, discard our card. That would get us up to 15, but is that good enough? As it stands, probably not. This cat does have to challenge, although both of those Clarabelles are at the ready for a potential challenge. So that doesn't sound too bad if I'm Bry Guy. And what did we draw for the turn? We drew Yzma. This has to be one of the better cards to draw in this situation. It, of course, can threaten to draw up to 3 cards on the next turn. And even if John Silver gets involved and gives Yzma Reckless, well, of course, you can just activate it prior to being forced to challenge anything. So what are we doing here? We're going to activate the cat, it looks like, as we know that the cat isn't long for this world. So let's go ahead and get this activation in first, moving the 2 damage, or maybe just 1 damage, onto that Clarabelle, removing the first Clarabelle. Now what are we doing with this Cheshire Cat? We could leave the Clarabelle on the board and double challenge into the Basil, or, I didn't consider this, we could challenge with the Olaf, return Cheshire Cat to our hand prior to it being forced to challenge. But we are going to go ahead and challenge with the Olaf, and with that boost ability, we essentially draw an additional card. Now, the Basil can, of course, challenge for Neurofuzz and remove one of those cards, but that leaves us with more options on the following turn. We could also challenge the Basil right now, so lots of options overall, but we have added to our hand with a Clarabelle remaining in play. Clarabelle at the ready. Neurofuzz beginning with, I believe, 1 card in hand that was. Oh, no. So we're up to 3, and now we're going to bounce the Yzma, and I think that's going to finish things off. The Yzma was kind of the last-ditch effort for Braga to potentially get back into this game, but now we have double Cinderella, so Neurofuzz is going to be able to cycle through the top of his deck should he so choose. Let's start by questing, and now we're going to quest with that Basil, force a discard from the opposing hand, randomizing up, rolling a dice, and it is that Cheshire Cat that we knew about now being discarded with the Basil. Not sure what happened there. Now, are we backing up the quest? Oh, yes, yes, yes. Of course. So yeah, the Basil, of course, was just played actually this turn. Uh, some confusion due to the Basil that was in play on the previous turn. So no harm, no foul, because the card revealed was known information, thankfully, being that Cheshire Cat. But it could have got a little messy if there is one mystery card in hand for Guy, but that was not the one revealed in this case. So go ahead and trigger that Clarabelle, draw a card that he actually wouldn't have drawn had that Basil quested. We do see our first dock of the game off the top for Guy, but is it too little, too late? Thinking carefully, this is the stage of the game. If you're going to manage a comeback, you need to play near perfectly from the Amethyst Steel side. But as it stands, you would also need to remove a character from the board, which he does in fact do, removing the Clarabelle as Neurofuzz was threatening lethal lore on the opposing side. Now we can ink, we can add cat to the board, we can ink play at dock, but neither of those cards is really going to get us out of this situation. So we do add the cat. However, John Silver, of course, can give the cat Reckless. We have this Basil available to discard the one remaining card for Guy, which we know is a dock. Quest with the Basil, discard the dock. Quest with the John Silver, give Cheshire Cat Reckless. Get in a couple more lore with those Cinderellas up to 19. What's one more John Silver? Let's give it double Reckless. That cat is really wild right now. And really just empty our hand, play a Kita, play a Clarabelle, pass it back. Nothing Guy can do here. Calhoun certainly not going to cut it. And right there, we see the power of the Amethyst, or excuse me, the Sapphire Emerald deck on the play with that Clarabelle shift line. With a second Clarabelle, your welcome was in the mix, and there really wasn't much Guy could have done differently to affect the outcome of that game. So they will shuffle up, and now Braga will have the opportunity to be on the play himself, which makes the world of difference in this particular matchup, as he will be looking to just curve out, add to the board, empty his hand as much as possible, and ideally have a way to interact with the small Clarabelle. Something like a Strength of a Raging Fire, of course, comes to mind in that scenario. In some cases, you can even Strength of a Raging Fire just on turn two for 2 damage, assuming you played characters on the first 2 turns. You don't always have the opportunity to wait to have an opportunity to sing it if the shift line is being threatened. Both these players, I believe, went undefeated in the Swiss portion of the tournament, as there was 5 rounds of Swiss yesterday, with the top 8 being played out today. We are in the semifinals. Top 4 being played out in Neurofuzz up a game with Emerald Sapphire. And if I'm Guy right now, outside of just wanting to execute my own strategy, I'm kind of hoping for Neurofuzz. Just send 7 back, send 7, miss your ramp, make it easy. Let's get to a game 3. We had to play yesterday. We had to drive back and forth. We're a little tired. Let's. I want to play game 3. We see the records updated there. So yeah, Guy was undefeated with those 2 intentional draws. It's always nice. I know it's a controversial topic sometimes with some Lorcana players, but if you start out undefeated for several rounds, a lot of times you can intentionally draw those final 2 rounds in the Swiss, as this record includes, I believe, the top eight victory. So just overall records for the tournament as a whole. So Bragai facing elimination. He is yet to lose in this tournament. Can he come back? It's going to have to start here in game two. The alter process, such an important aspect of Disney Lorcana. Bragai just finding one card that he's satisfied with. Meanwhile, it looks like Neurofuzz sends three back. So I just talked about Bragai wanting him to maybe send seven, be desperate for that ramp, be desperate for his pieces. However, the fact that he kept three, I guarantee you there's ramp in one of those three. Shuffling up and ready to go here in the near future. I'm sure these players, even though they're wrapping up their set 10 metagame, I'm sure they're very much looking forward to Winter Spell that is coming in actually less than a week now, as many stores will be running a pre-release on the upcoming Friday. If you haven't already, check with your local store. And even if they say, hey, we don't have a big Lorcana scene, we're not going to be planning on running a pre-release, say, hey, well, I'm interested. I could probably find a friend or two that's interested as well. So I know some areas that maybe aren't as densely populated as Southern California, where I'm from, or Northern California, where this tournament is taking place. They don't always have as strong of a scene that we have the luxury of. But really, you got to push the stores and let them know that, hey, if you run this tournament, I will show up. So Olaf kicking things off for Bragai. Meanwhile, Tipo into the Inkwell, develop your brain. And always, if you see a Sapphire player ink Tipo on turn one, that means they either have a second one or they have the Sail the Azurite Sea in hand. So we saw Bragai just deploying two Captain Hooks at the start of the previous game. Ideally, you have a two drop in this situation. We do, however, see the Palace Guard pulled to the front, and that is what we're going to see here. So, Palace Guard and Olaf combining similarly to what we saw in the previous game with those double Captain Hooks. All right, Basil into the Inkwell. We have the Sail the Azurite Sea. And you can already tell just how differently things play out uh, when a different player is on the play. However, we do see that one cost Clarabelle. Can we get a three costed Singer down to threaten a Strength of a Raging Fire on the following turn? We see Benja. Now, is Benja our only three drop? Benja could go into the Inkwell in favor of a separate three drop, as its come into play ability not effective on this board. And I do believe I see a Strength of a Raging Fire in hand for that Clarabelle potentially. Inking the Benja. 3 ink. 4. Is this Strength of a Raging Fire just for 2, like I talked about pregame? No, it is a Giant Cobra. So that will allow for a Singer on the following turn. We're going to discard Hades. So prioritizing that lore, realizing Hades not very good, as we saw in the previous game, in the face of Clarabelle, as 9 times out of 10, it will just give you cards which it will effectively give cards to the opponent. So now if you're Neurofuzz, what do? You have Heffalumps and Woozles to answer that Giant Cobra, and that is the cost of playing Vanished characters. So he could have played Benja to protect himself from a play like that. So now I think we're going to be forced to pay full price for that Strength of a Raging Fire on the next turn, really just to shut off in any way possible the potential Clarabelle shift line, especially after a vision of the future. You have to believe that Neurofuzz is lining up his future turns, and Clarabelle more than likely is in the mix. Okay, he begs to differ. We're going to challenge the Olaf. No bounce. We don't want to return this Palace Guard to hand. And if I'm Bragai, I'm breathing a sigh of relief here, because even if he doesn't have the Clarabelle, This essentially opened up my turn to so many other possibilities compared to that Strength of a Raging Fire that we now see enter the inkwell. So instead, we get to deploy the Dumbo. Only one card remaining in our hand. Is it a dock? Meanwhile, Neurofuzz, a fistful of cards, maybe recognizing, hey, even if I had Clarabelle on the previous turn, it wasn't going to be able to draw me any cards because Bragai has smartly emptied his hand so efficiently. Another vision of the future, thinking carefully about those top five cards. And outside of something like an ink and a mother knows best, it looks like this Dumbo is going to get some value on the following turn, potentially for Bragai. And Neurofuzz with so many cards already in his hand, really trying to piece together how am I going to proceed with this game. I didn't quite pick up what he did select. We did see a small Prince Philip in the mix, so it's possible he could deploy one here. We do in fact have that Prince Philip, and now we are threatening the potential combo shift line on a future turn. And this Prince Philip, this ward, I got a nitpick with the designers for just a moment. I think ward on a character that can be shifted onto, maybe not the best decision. Who am I to say? But the fact that you can't interact with this potential combo outside of something like a Demona, which remains to be seen if this Amethyst Steel deck has in their deck. Some players opting for Demona, some without. We do draw a card with that Dumbo. And now you're stuck in a tough position as we see the Strength of a Raging Fire inked for the turn, which, like I said, cannot choose that Prince Philip thanks to that word ability. And now we're wondering, do we want to add more threats to the board in the face of the combo? We are going to add at least one character quest with that palace card. And I mentioned Olaf does throw off the combo ever so slightly, as if you do play malicious, mean, and scary, you will allow yourself to bounce this Dumbo potentially. You could also just shift and then challenge the Dumbo straight away. That is an option as well if you don't have the malicious, mean, and scary available. But Neurofuzz certainly has a number of options available to him with that fistful of cards. Piecing together what his plan is going to be here. Thinking about it. I think his plan was to combo this turn. Now maybe having a second thought, thanks to that Olaf. We are going to ink Clarabelle, and we do play John Silver. So what are we going to choose with this reckless ability? John Silver onto the Dumbo. Well, that's not very effective because, of course, Dumbo can simply use the Breaking Records ability to draw a card. Looks like he does. Well, it looks like he pointed to the Dumbo for reckless, but then returned it with Mother Knows Best. And we, of course, had to sing The Mother Knows Best with the Prince Philip. So that shuts off potentially comboing on a future turn as well. So perhaps I spoke too soon and the combo was not available for Neurofuzz. But if I'm Bry Guy, I'm certainly considering removing this Prince Philip from the board if I have the opportunity. I am curious if something else was given reckless and not the Dumbo, and I just didn't quite see what was chosen there. But if If the Dumbo was chosen for Reckless and then Bounce with the Mother Knows Best, just a minor error there from Neurofuzz. But we're going to start things off by inking that Palace card. 5 ink, or no, excuse me, 6 ink for Demona. We do have Demona in our deck, and it's going to draw 2 cards for Bry Guy and 1 card for Neurofuzz. We are going to go ahead and take that exchange. Olaf into the Prince Philip while we have the opportunity. So either way, even if he didn't sing that Mother Knows Best, that Prince Philip was in fact getting turned sideways thanks to that Demona. All right, we have 3 cards in hand because of course, our own Demona. But the Sapphire Emerald deck really doesn't have many ways to exert the Demona, but it does have ways to return it to your hand, and he does just that with that powerful song, Mother Knows Best. And we are going to trigger that Cinderella at the end of the turn, add to our hand, pass it back, just that Palace card available to quest or challenge if it so chooses. Palace card not the best challenger into the big old baddie, John Smith. We do have Elsa the Fifth Spirit available. We could play Elsa and combine that with the Palace card to take out the Cinderella. I don't know how threatening Cinderella is on this board. Of course, she is an excellent singer, and the Emerald Sapphire deck having a number of songs in their deck. But we do decide to ink that Elsa, play Iago, and then a Lexington. So it leaves us with 2 cards remaining. And if you're Neurofuzz, I know you can't take notes in this particular game, but those 2 cards are known information as they were both returned to Bry Guy's hand. So we'll see if he's able to remember exactly what those contents are and plan accordingly. We're going to kick things off by inking Kita. We now have a second John Smith added to the board. We are going to choose the Lexington, it looks like. Now, this John Smith is going to quest, and of course, the Palace card to challenge. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We just went ahead and challenged the Palace card itself. So now that gives the Lexington an opportunity to challenge the exerted John Smith and effectively trade. Thinking things through here, we of course still have that Demona in our hand that was returned to hand. Looks like we're eyeing that Dumbo. We could play the Dumbo, draw a card with Iago. Of course, Lexington with the alert ability, and not the previous ability that we saw in a lot of early sets, which gives a character evasive on your own turn, which combos quite well with the Dumbo, but alert doesn't work quite the same. We'll start by inking Yzma, and we do, in fact, decide to deploy the Demona. We're going to add 2 cards to our hand. Meanwhile, Neurofuzz gets just 1. Oh, no, I apologize. He got 2. So, Bry Guy opting to give some additional cards here, and we are going to decide to challenge the Iago into the John Smith, which lives to tell the tale, and that allows an opportunity because of the Demona exerting a different character. Now Lexington can challenge. So Bry Guy has 10 lore, but really battling to keep his board presence and fight off all these opposing characters, as Neurofuzz will start things off with Assail the Azurite Sea. He'll have an opportunity to double ink should he so choose. Just 1 so far into the Tipo. Is this a Basil or a Hades, perhaps? We haven't seen Hades just yet in this deck. We're going to back this up, think it through. We are in top 4. Neurofuzz playing for an opportunity to get into the finals. He is up a game. We are going to bend to my will. 3 cards. And bend to my will after that Demona resolving is a difficult spot for Bryguy to be in. We are going to go ahead and play that Malicious Mean and Scary, which does answer the Iago, and it adds 1 damage to the Demona. So if Demona chooses to challenge the John Smith, well, they will trade off as well. So much of the math in Lorcana is pattern recognition, and the second you just add 1 damage or 1 strength or 1 resist to any character that you're not used to seeing that attribute, that can make the world of difference. Because usually Demona is looking pretty good into this John Silver. However, when it has that 1 damage, not so much. Bryguy realizing, hey, I'm just going to quest. I'm going to go up to 13 here. If you want to challenge back with the John Smith, so be it. If you want to quest and give my character reckless, well, at least I gained some extra lore on my turn. So we'll see what Neurofuzz can come up with. We're going to kick things off with an improvise. I talked about how 1 strength can make all the world of difference. Well, it's not necessarily needed in this case. Just cycling off the top of the deck, drawing another card. And I saw a little shake of the head from Neurofuzz, and you can see exactly why. If you're deploying a TPO at this stage of the game, that is not what you're looking for. I know it did win the finals in Richmond, a very late game TPO combination, but on this particular board with 0 lore, I don't think that TPO is going to do a whole lot. I have to wonder what the remaining card is in Neurofuzz's hand. I'm sure he would have loved to draw on something like the Big Prince Philip to finish off some of these characters. But right now, he's trying to determine what do I do with this John Silver. It could challenge into the Lexington, and then Captain Hook cracks it back. Or, of course, you could just go ahead and trade with this Demona. You could quest, give something reckless. So really all the options on the table for Neurofuzz here. Thinking carefully, I don't blame him. High stakes matchup. Top 4 of the Winter Lorefest, as we are going to play Malicious, Mean, and Scary, which does finish off the Lexington. And we go ahead and quest. We add some lore to the board, force Demona to challenge, unless we draw any sort of song off the top. We have the Genie. That's one of the better cards to draw when you're empty-handed and applying pressure. So now we will likely see the Demona challenge into the John Smith, or John Silver, excuse me. I think I've been saying John Smith for quite a while. My apologies. John Smith on the brain, of course, added to the game in Winter Spell, but 2 very different characters. So Captain Hook goes on a quest up to 14 is Bryguy. The TPO could put in a little work challenging back into that Captain Hook. It does indeed do just that. But what was that one card drawn off the top? It needs to be a good one if you're Neurofuzz. If it was really any character, I was going to say we'd see it added to the board. So he was really just thinking about, hey, this come into playability. Do I want to prevent a second lore? Meanwhile, giving Bryguy an opportunity to draw an additional card with the Genie. So that was really weighing the option of, do I return the Jafar? Do I return the Genie? With Bryguy already at 14 lore, ultimately deciding on the Genie there. So Genie draws another card into the He hurled his Thunderbolt, which is a clean answer in the face of that Basil. Jafar goes on a quest, and even Tipo, the little boy that could, unable to challenge Jafar effectively. So now Bryguy threatening 3 additional lore, and 18 is a really scary spot to be in against a steel deck or Amethyst Steel specifically because, of course, the threat of Giant Cobra. He does finally find a Prince Philip Sotipo, putting in work, putting that single damage on that Jafar, and able to finish it off there. But another Genie off the top for Guy. Once again, one of the better cards available to him to draw in this position. Now you can quest with the Genie, get up to 50 or get up to 17, excuse me, and then we would be threatening 3 additional lore with this Genie and now the Olaf added to the board. So Neurofuzz has to draw something here. He has the answer already rolled up with the Prince Philip for the Exerted Genie. What do we find? A shrug of the shoulders. We have another Prince Philip. That's not going to cut it. One of the most powerful cards in the game, but in this spot, without a Malicious Means Scary to combine with it, it is not going to do the trick. So Guy able to even things up here in the semifinals of the Winter Lorefest. And we go to a game 3. We see both players on the play with a significant advantage. Now, if you're Guy, you need to come up with a way to win on the draw. So for Guy, if you're looking to win on the draw, you're just looking for any sort of stumble from your opponent. Amethyst Steel is so consistent in its strategy of simply curving out, getting a Strength of a Raging Fire in the mix. Meanwhile, Emerald Sapphire also very consistent in the early stages of the game with those 8 ramp cards available, with Cinderella available to smooth out your hand as needed. So really, Guy just hoping that Neurofuzz is unable to piece things together in those early turns because we saw Guy with the early advantage on the previous game, largely because Neurofuzz was spending a lot of his early turns just piecing his hand together with a few different versions of the vision of the future. All right, we're ready to go here for game 3. And if I'm playing, regardless of what side of the matchup on, I'm paying very close attention to how many cards you are altering in the matchup. The player on the play does choose first, and it looks like Neurofuzz very quickly sending 4 back. Now, he did send 4 back on the previous game, keeping 3, and we know that his hand didn't quite pan out the way he would have hoped. So if I'm Guy, I'm keeping that in mind. Meanwhile, we are sending 6 yet again. So I believe the exact same alteration number on both sides. These players seem pretty friendly. I'm sure they're familiar with each other as locals to the area, perhaps having played each other many times before. These players showing up to this local event, putting their mettle to the test, and now 1 game away from the finals. Right? Does Neurofuzz have an early Clarabelle to threaten the shift line? That's the first thing I want to know if I am a Guy. But no, he's going to start things off with that Develop Your Brain, inking the Sail the Azurite Sea. So almost assuredly has a second ramp spell available to him. Now, Guy, what is going to be our 1-drop of choice? What was the one card we kept? Was it a 1-drop? To guarantee having a play on turn 1. Inking Elsa into the Olaf. Also, one of the best ways to answer the small Clarabelle, but probably not going to be able to come down in time to threaten it, as we see the Prince Philip into the inkwell, sailing the Azurite Sea. Ink the Tipo. Do we have Clarabelle? We can, of course, try and just Cinderella on the next turn into our 6 ink turn and play small Clarabelle and big Clarabelle in one fell swoop to protect that small Clarabelle. Perhaps thinking about that, but ultimately deciding to go ahead and deploy it right now. So Bragai on the defensive in this one has to be worried about that Clarabelle shift line. Thinking about this second ink very carefully. And we haven't seen a 2-drop on turn 2 from our guy in each of the previous games. Does he have it here? We ink that fancy Demona, and we do, in fact, have that Calhoun opting not to quest with the Olaf. Doesn't want to offer up the Olaf in a trade with this Clarabelle potentially. And we see develop your brain, so no 4-drop for Neurofuzz. And I saw a little nod of the head from Bry Guy. I'm thrilled if I'm him to not see something like a Cinderella come down on this turn. So what is our follow-up here? We could play something like a Prince Philip. We could play a Malicious Mean and Scary that would simply answer this Olaf, but we do opt for the Philip, inking that vision of the future. And now thinking carefully if he wants to do something with this Clarabelle, wisely just passes back in the face of this Calhoun. So now Bry Guy into his 3 ink turn. Looks like we have some options. Cheshire Cat pulled to the front. Thinking carefully, this cat could be going into the inkwell, not at its best in this particular matchup. I suppose there's some scenarios where if a Malicious Mean is Scary is played preemptively, then you can get some damage off of an important character. But here, opting to Strength of a Raging Fire, that Clarabelle, that's the play I talked about in game 2 as something you sometimes are simply forced to do in the face of a potential shift on the following turn. So not having the luxury while being on the draw of getting a singer down first. So it is a good tempo swing in favor of Neurofuzz. However, he is going to have to answer some of these characters on the board. Will this Prince Philip simply challenge either the Olaf or the Calhoun, or will it stick around and stay ready for a shift line in the future? So we do see the Cinderella here with that 4 ink, and it looks like we may not be inking for the turn and simply passing to trigger that Cinderella. And oh, we are going to ink the Kita. Okay, so now we're thinking about this Prince Philip. I got ahead of myself. Apologies. Calhoun is taken down in the challenge. And now we are going to go ahead and trigger that Cinderella. Draw a card off the top. So just 2 cards remaining and 6 ink for Neurofuzz. So well ahead in the ink count. And now if you're Bry Guy, this Olaf isn't looking too good in the face of this Cinderella. We only have 2 lore. What can we do to try and apply some pressure? I see in the chat a member of the non-inkables, Batsu, was looking for a Palace Guard on turn 1. And Palace Guard here, it would have been able to quest on turn 2, even in the face of the Clarabelle. It would have been able to quest on this turn safely against the Cinderella. So I could see why Palace Guard would make a significant difference as the 1-drop of choice over this Olaf. So Genie coming down, and it's possible you could just pay full price for a big Clarabelle here. And if you have something like a You're Welcome, well, do we have a second You're Welcome? I assume we do. If we're inking one, we are going to think twice. Maybe it was our only inkable. Maybe that is an uninkable card in hand. He was unable to combo with the Clarabelle into the You're Welcome. However, Braga had 4 cards in his hand anyway, so that Clarabelle so strong in drawing 3 cards immediately off the top. And this is just a tough position. The average card quality at this stage of the game for the Emerald Sapphire player is just going to be higher. He has so much more ink to work with, and Braga is going to have to piece this together and gain any lore he can when possible. That genie, of course, is a strong threat. All right, Dock for no value, not ideal. We're going to Strength of a Raging Fire, 3 damage onto the Clarabelle, and then an additional 3 damage thanks to that second Strength. So now just one card remaining. So think about the immense value that that Clarabelle, that didn't even need to be shifted. He paid 1 card to draw 3 and effectively discard a few cards from the opposition. So now under the sea, those cards were placed in the discard. They're going to have to go under the deck, but yeah, they'll get that straightened out. But yes, just an excellent answer there for Neurofuzz. And meanwhile, just one card remaining for Bryguy. Is it a dock? That might be his best opportunity to have any chance at coming back in this one. I see an Elsa. That could only do so much. It was a genie left behind in hand. Draws a card, looks like a giant cobra. And we're just going to pass it back. So now if you're Bryguy, you just want a handful of T-pos. But Vision of the Future probably isn't going to find a T-po here off the top 5. Just looking for a way. I know the lore totals are very low right now, but Neurofuzz in such a great position to finish this one off in short order. Finds what he's looking for. Let's go 6 more ink into that Max Goof, which is the first appearance of Max Goof in the matchup here in Game 3. Inspecting the discard pile, both players are going to take a look. What songs do you have available for this Max Goof? And we are going to go ahead and quest with that Cinderella. Under the Sea, not an option for Max Goof. I believe there may be a Malicious Mean It's Scary in the discard, but didn't quite pick one up when each player was fanning through there. Pick up another Genie off the top. And we're not going to have much of an answer to this Max Goof. Let's just add some more lower pressure to the board, add another card to our hand. We at least drew something that we can add to the board yet again in that Captain Hook. So Genie up to 5 with that 2 lore of questing. Fuzz quickly inks up to 9 ink. We have the Malicious Mean Scary into the Prince Philip, and that I think you could see the facial expression from Bryguy there. That will certainly finish off his chances of coming back in this game. However, we did draw a dock. What can the dock do? We could play the Cobra, discard a card, and play the dock to draw a couple additional cards. That might be a route to potentially coming back. We do play the Cobra, exactly. Discard that Elsa. Now the Doc. Doc's going to need to hit some heavy hitters. What do we find? Look like a second Cobra. Okay. I mean, we're only at 7, but we got to get to 20 somehow. And Cobra can certainly help in that regard. However, Neurofuzz now threatening 6 lore of his own in questing power. Starts things off with Assail the Azurite Sea. He, of course, can quest with this Max Goof and play an additional Malicious Mean and Scary should he so choose. But instead, he's going to play that Clarabelle, ink the Prince Philip. I believe he may be empty-handed now. And with 2 cards in the hand for Bryguy, that Clarabelle getting more value. What does he find off the top? Look like a Cheshire Cat. Really not at his best here. And notably, the Max Goof hanging back, not wanting to uh, have any potential for Bryguy to challenge it back, I suppose, with that Cobra and Doc. A guy taking his time, and I don't blame him here. He's in a tough spot, just trying to piece together how can I possibly come back in this game. Yzma's not a bad start, but it has to live a turn cycle to be as effective. What do we do with the Cobra? I think we're just going to go questing. Up to 9. I think that card remaining in Brian Guy's hand is a giant Cobra. So if Neurofuzz is unable to answer this Yzma, you can draw for the turn, play the Cobra, discard, and then activate Yzma for 3 new cards. But instead, this tells me, malicious, mean, and scary, do we have a second Prince Philip? We do, in fact, have the Prince Philip, and this one's going to be over quite quickly. Clarabelle and Cinderella and that Prince Philip can all go questing, and I believe we'll be threatening Lorthal on the following turn. And really nothing the Amethyst Steel deck can do in this spot. We did have that Cobra. We can play the Cobra. We're going to get up to 11. We got double digits here in the semifinals, but that's not going to do it. Congrats to Neurofuzz advancing to the finals. Nicely done by him, just firmly in control of both of those games while on the play. And the Prince Philips really shined in that particular game. They didn't always show up at the right time in the previous 2 games, but really having its moment to shine there as we see the power of the malicious, mean, and scary combo. So congrats to Neurofuzz. I don't. I'll see if I can get some insight on his finals opponent. Notably, Non-Inkable's Q was in the semifinals on the other side of the bracket versus the player that we saw in the quarterfinals with that victory with the Amethyst Amber deck. So could Q get some revenge in the finals for Bry Guy? Remains to be seen. But it looks like that one is still ongoing. So don't have an update for that matchup, but we will have the finals as soon as possible. I know a lot of people are excited about the Super Bowl today, but we should be able to wrap up just shortly before that gets started. So what better than watching a Lorcana finals and then maybe some Super Bowl action if that's your thing as well. Yeah, the chat says the Under the Sea turn was lights out. I think there was 3 total sweeps in that game with the combination of both the Under the Sea and the combo of Prince Philip and of course Malicious, Mean, and Scary. All right, I am being told that yeah, that match is still ongoing. Q is playing dogs against Amber Amethyst and has a couple Chromacons down. So Chromacon's one of the more effective cards just overall. Such a difficult card to play with and against. I know there's been some controversial tweets in the Lorcana world lately about how aggro's just going to take over the game and Amber is going to be too good. And I really question that overall. As apologies, we'll get this straightened out so you can see my beautiful face even closer. I know I'm just peeking out of the corner here right now, but I feel like we've seen this a number of times before. Think about when Aurora was spoiled, and everyone was worried that Aurora Tiana decks would take over the metagame, that there weren't enough tools to answer aggressive decks. I just don't buy it. We of course saw Amber Steel with Tiana be quite successful, but it wasn't successful in this last metagame. Uh, Thinking of set 9 where it really had its time to shine thanks to Aurora Tiana, but things certainly changed a little bit after that. So yeah, remains to be seen if Grandmother Willow and the like and all these new Amber cards that people are excited about are really going to have that much impact as far as taking over. I don't think anything's taking over. I think it's anything, Winter Spell is just going to widen the metagame from what I can tell. There could be some new color combinations that previously just weren't very popular. We saw a lot of people try something like Sapphire Amber in the previous format. Joshua Paltrey is also always up to some wacky ideas, and he's been very effective in doing so in his Lorcana career. And I know he had a very good Sapphire Amber deck in the previous metagame, or I should say the current metagame prior to Winter Spell. But I have to imagine he's pretty excited about the new opportunities and new cards potentially to add to that strategy. I know I've looked at the card Ludwig von Drake. The second it came out, I was like, wow, this card is really strong. Will we see its time to shine? Remains to be seen. And really interesting that Amber got the board wipe. I think if you would have pulled Lorcana players prior to the reveal of what color is going to get the board wipe that they were hinting at for so long, I don't think it necessarily fell into Amber's color identity prior to the printing of Raging Storm, at least how I perceived it. Uh, so, so yeah, really interesting that they decided to color swap the sweeper of choice in this metagame, and maybe Be Prepared will just be relegated to the Infinity format forever. Will we ever see Be Prepared again in Core Constructed? Anything's possible. I won't rule it out, but right now, as it stands, we are living in a raging storm world in the near future. And I know a lot of people on the East Coast have been living in a raging storm world for the past few weeks, but here in California, the host of the tournament, Winter Lorefest, I'm sure it's quite warm up there. It is, of course, warm here in Southern California. As you can see, my son just the sun just blinding the background here, even through the shades. It doesn't matter here in Southern California. Maybe I need some blackout shades to keep that out. But we will have the finals here in the very near future. I am going to take a very quick break as yes, the weather is in fact quite perfect today, even though I haven't been outside just yet. And hey, you know the Super Bowl's coming up, so maybe I won't be outside again until the evening. But either way, we are going to get these finals underway here in the near future as the players are still wrapping up that other semifinal, and we'll see what is going to be the matchup. We know that Sapphire Emerald will be in the finals. Will it be playing against a Dogs player? Will it be playing against Amber Amethyst that we saw win its quarterfinal matchup? We will know very, very soon. Stick around. We will be right back. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Winter Lorefest. This is the finals approaching as we have Neurofuzz, who we just saw take down Amethyst Steel in the semifinals against Q. Now, Q, we'll get this updated for you, is playing the Amber Emerald Dogs deck into the finals. I believe she was eighth place after Swiss, so battling on the draw in the top eight thus far. Can she do it one more time against the deck that we know is quite strong on the play in Emerald Sapphire, of course? So, what does this matchup look like? Well, Q will maybe have an easier time being more aggressive than what we saw in the Amethyst Steel matchup. Amethyst Steel really only downside is basically everything quest for one, right? Well, Dogs has an opportunity to be much more aggressive as early as turn one with something like a Daisy Duck. They also have a little bit more disruptive elements with things like Mowgli and Ursula and the like. So I imagine that will play out here in the finals, but we will have to wait and see as there is quite a bit on the line up top. Six total boxes. You get two first chapter boxes, two winter spell boxes, two whispers in the well boxes. So I imagine whoever comes out victorious will be quite thrilled with that ransom up top. But either way, both of these players get a ticket to the Glimmer Games, the CCQ in the Northern California area in the near future, presented by Margolis Gaming Company. I don't think that's the official title, but I'm sure they'll happy to get a shout out either way. But definitely, if you are in the Northern California area, if you're on the West Coast, if you're in America at all, make sure you join us at the upcoming CCQ, the Glimmer Games, up there in Northern California. I believe both of these players also get the convention playmat. Is that what we're seeing here on Q's side of things? I believe it might be. As you can see, the 2025 in the bottom right corner. I believe this was the playmat given out at conventions throughout the 2025 year. I don't believe there's been any new one added here in 2026. I could be wrong. Uh, it's kind of my brand at this point. I'm not a big playmat guy, but the average Lorcana player, they love playmats. They love to get the exclusive ones. So happy for each of these players able to get that prize as well. So we are just about ready to go to kick off the finals of the Winter Lorefest. Neurofuzz will be on the play, and players are shuffling up and dealing. And I believe I saw right when we were getting started here, the players opening up their phones, looking at the deck list. So, production, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this may be an open deck list tournament here in the finals, which would allow each player to investigate what they're up against pregame, and that can certainly affect your altered decisions as well. Although when you get to the finals at this point, you generally have a pretty good idea of what your opponent's up to, as there has been now 8 rounds of play in this tournament, or this being the eighth round. You will see what's around you most of the day. Gotcha. Yeah, I did get confirmation that it is in fact open deck list and has been for the entirety of the top eight, and that certainly applies a little bit of a wrinkle into things. And the better the player, the better they can take advantage of each piece of information that they get. As you could see, these players finishing off their alterations. Looks like Q kept 2 or 3 cards, and meanwhile, it looked like 3 cards kept for Neurofez on the opposing end. So Neurofez will kick us off here in game one of the finals, best of three matchup. I imagine these two players are quite familiar with each other, as we are going to kick things off, inking a Basil and simply passing the turn. Ursula off the top, could that be played as early as turn two to disrupt the many powerful songs that we know Neurofuzz has available to him? We even saw Max Goof in the semifinal show up. So, hey, even if you discard something with Ursula, it could pop back up thanks to the Max Goof triggered ability. But we're going to start things off with Lady. This deck is called Dogs for a reason. Many, many dogs available to deploy in the early turns of the game. We're going to ink that big Clarabelle, sail the Azurite Sea, and what is going to be the follow-up ink here? Inking that Prince Philip and passing back. So no small Clarabelle just yet for Neurofuzz, which we saw be quite effective in the previous matchup against Amethyst Steel, just threatening that shift line always. Meanwhile, one of the best cards in the Dog's deck, Tramp, going into the Inkwell, but Webby in combination with another Tramp will boost up the Lady lore total to allow Lady to quest for 2. So Q off to the races here, doing what her dog's deck does best in just playing out characters in the early turns and saving that disruption element for future turns. So meanwhile for Neurofuzz, we saw in the previous match, he wasn't always having 4-drops at his disposal on turn 3, which is ideally what you want to do after sailing the Azurite Sea. However, here he does in fact have that Cinderella. We see the Prince Philip into the Inkwell. So we've seen some strong cards into the Inkwell on both sides of the board. We saw the Tramp and then the Philip and the big Clarabelle. And now we trigger that Cinderella, draw a card off the top, pass it back to Q here. Now, a lot of times Cinderella isn't the best challenger in a lot of matchups, but on this board, doesn't look too bad. So we'll see if anything turns sideways for Q in the face of this Cinderella. First, we'll start off with Bobby Zimmerowski, draw and discard. Lilo does her best work when starting out in the discard pile. I'm curious if we have a second Tramp somewhere in the mix. The Tramp 7 cost. Wouldn't be able to deploy it just yet, but we did see one hit the Inkwell on the previous turn. But we are going to pay full price for a Lilo into play. And look, you can only challenge one of these characters with this Cinderella. I'm going to get this lore while I can. We're going to quest for 4, immediately up to 6. And we do know that Neurofuzz has Under the Sea in his deck. That's a deck that sometimes you see, sometimes you don't. Carefully mapping out his turn. We did see the Cinderella challenge that lady. That part is easy, but what else are we going to do here now with potentially 6 ink at our disposal once we ink for the turn? Something like a John Silver could come down, perhaps, but don't really have an opportunity to add a character that would immediately answer a threat on the other side of the board. We do see the John Silver. It's going to give something reckless. It will be that Lilo, and we'll pass it back. So Lilo unable to quest this turn. How will that factor into things? She could get boosted by something like the Tramp 2 drop that we see in play to manage to take out this Cinderella. We're going to start with Ursula. You have 3 cards in hand. Are any of them songs? No. 2 John Silvers and a Cinderella. You know, as disappointing as it is to miss with Ursula, that isn't the most threatening hand, as it is unable to. Well, there's no sweepers. Let's say that. There's no Under the Sea, although, of course, if there was an Under the Sea, could have nabbed it there. Now, do we want to finish off this Cinderella is the question. Given that Cinderella now has 2 damage because of the Lilo, we are going to, in fact, challenge with the Tramp and then quest with the other 2 as The other two characters would not have been able to stick around after a challenge. So, yes, we have a John Silver. We can give some more characters Reckless should we so choose. We could deploy a second John Silver here. John Silver does work pretty well in tandem with each other. And for Q, just trying to apply aggression here. She has two Lilos in the discard pile that could potentially come back in the near future. And then John Silver, do you quest or you challenge is the question. We are going to go ahead and challenge, get that tramp off the board, deploy a second John Silver. What are we going to give Reckless here? We go ahead and give it to the Ursula. The only other slight consideration you can make is maybe the Webby to prevent a shift and an additional lore. However, a lot of players these days aren't necessarily playing that Webby shift line. They're just playing the one cost Webby in this dog's deck. But we will start the turn bringing back the Lilo, deploying a lady, and let's just turn some cards sideways. We're going to quest with this Bobby and Webby, and then we are forced to challenge with just one additional damage on the John Silver. So up to 10 now. And this is a position where Emerald Chromacon could be strong, as these John Silvers are threatening to remove anything off the board should it so choose. Of course, you could just quest, gain 2 lore, and then force a challenge, which is what he's going to start out with the Bobby. Excuse me, no, it gets a little tricky when you're just watching to determine whether he's questing or challenging and pointing for that reckless ability, but ultimately opting for 2 challenges and then giving the Lilo Reckless. So now this lady has an opportunity to quest, thinking about the Lilo trigger as there is one remaining in the discard, but just drawing for the turn. But this is a tough position for the Dogs deck, as there aren't very many opportunities to remove these John Silvers from the board. If you're just joining us, we are in Game 1 of the finals of the Winter Lorefest. A lot on the line. Each of these players have already received the convention playmat, a ticket to the Glimmer Games CCQ, but playing for many boxes, including First Chapter and Winter Spell. How many tournaments are doing that right now, where you can get the first boxes and the most recent set that, of course, will be coming out next week. So we start things off with the shift line. The lady picks up 2 characters. We're going to start with this tramp. We have one more to choose from. Looks like the Ursula, I believe. So we can play this tramp for just 1 ink. We can ink for the turn, play the tramp, pump up either the lady or the Lilo. We do have an opportunity to potentially trade for each of these John Silvers. We start by boosting the Lilo, I believe. We will challenge into a John Silver. Now, what do we do with this lady? We can quest up to 12, or we could challenge, or we could just hang back. But if we hang back, it most likely will just gain Reckless on a following turn. So we do opt to quest, add to that lore total up to 12. Neurofuzz draws for turn. We do know that he has a Cinderella in his hand from the previous reveal of an Ursula a few turns ago. And we do, in fact, start things out with that Cinderella. I'm not too disappointed to see that if I'm Q, because there's so many threatening cards that can be deployed once you're up to 7 ink with this Emerald Sapphire strategy. If you're starting things out with a Cinderella, that means the remaining 2 cards in your hand may not be all that impressive. We do go ahead and challenge the John Silver that has 1 damage into the lady. We're going to force this tramp to challenge in the future, trigger Cinderella, draw a card off the top. Now what do? We have Lilos at our disposal. Do those come into play here? Thinking carefully. I think there's a misconception that from some players at least, that dogs is an easy deck to play. I think it might be the hardest deck to play in the metagame because of all these micro decisions that come into play each and every turn, and your margin for victory can be quite slim a lot of the time, as we do see one Lilo returned, and now another Ursula. What do you have? We have a Vision of the Future and a Clarabelle. So Ursula 0 for 2 thus far, and that disruption element is important in this matchup, but so far has come up empty. Vision of the Future, a little scary on the opposing side. We're going to ink a Webby, challenge into the John Silver. We have no choice. And we did manage to remove two John Silvers from the board, but is this third one going to continue to be a problem? We're going to start off with that Vision of the Future. We have 6 ink remaining, so we could play the Clarabelle that we know is in hand. Or we could find a 7-cost character, ink the Clarabelle, and deploy that if we so choose. Weighing his options with, or excuse me, he got the card off the Vision, now inking, deploying that Clarabelle, and challenging with the Cinderella. Now we can, of course, give Reckless to the Ursula. So yeah, these Lilos can theoretically come back every turn, but when you have challengers on the opposing side and nothing like an Emerald Chromacon, how effective is bringing that Lilo back? Thinking about it here, I believe Q started with 1 card in her hand, so now up to 2. Does not opt to bring the Lilo back. How can we deal with this remaining John Silver? We start things off with a lady. And we have no choice with the Ursula. Well, I suppose we do have a choice. We can choose whether we want to send into the John Silver, or of course, the Cinderella. Now the Go-Go comes into play. 2 damage on the Cinderella, up to 14. That is always one way that an Emerald deck can come back from behind, is Go-Go Tamago. And notably, no evasive characters on the opposing side of the board. However, the John Silver can, of course, give the Go-Go Reckless. So maybe Q is looking for more Go-Go's off the top, or something as simple as uh, we draw a big lady off the top, and maybe we challenge with the Go-Go and we just get it back. So Basil returning the lady. Of course, you do not want to return that Go-Go in this particular situation. Quest with the John Silver. We do give Reckless to the Go-Go, and we're going to go ahead and quest with that Clarabelle. Once again, thinking carefully about these Lilo triggers. I believe Q has the one lady in hand. I can't quite tell if Neurofuzz has any cards in his hand. Unclear if maybe a Clarabelle trigger got missed. I'm not quite sure. Or maybe those 2 cards are not the Inkwell. It'd be tough to decipher in this game sometimes with face down cards so close to each other. All right, we are going to decide to bring just one of those Lilos back. We did have that lady return to our hand, now adding a second card to our hand. What can we do? With these two cards, we can of course start by playing the lady, potentially. We do just that. And I think it was all the way back on turn 2 or 3 where we had to ink a tramp 7, and that could have proved to be costly overall. And unfortunately, we do not get to deploy the one card remaining in our hand, which when facing down a Basil, of course, Basil can just quest and discard that hand, so not ideal here. However, that John Silver has 3 damage on it. Can we find a way to find another go-go off the top? It was Emerald Chromacon. What's with John Silver? No, we're going to sing Under the Sea. That answers the Lilo problem, at least one of them. And now questing for 4. Can we come back here? We're threatening 6 lore. We have lethal on the board. Does Neuro Fuzz? A go-go's not going to cut it. Will Lilo help? Q decides no. What could the Lilo do here? We need to remove something from the board to have a chance. I'm not sure if there's a single draw step that could get her out of this. I was thinking maybe if we had 2 turns, we could draw Go-Go into Go-Go. That, of course, wouldn't cut it. Lady, you got to pay full price. You can bring a couple characters back. You can bring that Go-Go back, but that's not going to be enough. First game goes to Neurofuzz here in the finals of Winter Lorefest. And we saw once again just the power of Emerald, Sapphire. Really, the Clarabelles and the Sweepers, we know Under the Sea was played there towards the end, but ultimately didn't have an impact on the finish of the game. But really, 2 things come to mind in that game for Q that didn't quite go as planned, which is number one, you played 2 Ursulas, and they were unable to get any cards out of the hand of Neurofuzz. And whatever the situation was early in the game where we had to ink one of our Tramp 7s, and that proved to be costly, as it is one of the better cards in the deck overall. But now Q will have an opportunity to be on the play in this matchup, and we saw it previously with another member of Non-Inkables, Bry Guy, in the semifinals up against Neurofuzz playing Amethyst Steel. Being on the play, well, if you play Lorcana, you already know it makes a huge difference. Triple John Silver. Not only was it able to answer the threats on the board, but it was also gaining lore along the way, and really every lore mattered there. Maybe there was an opportunity if Q could have had one more turn, Lady into pick up the Go-Go and another threat. Maybe there would have been a chance there in some form or fashion, but ultimately the John Silvers get the job done. This could be the final game of the tournament. But if you're Q or a Q fan or a non-Inkables fan, you're hoping that we can see a game 3. I do see Horseman Strikes in Q's hand. It looks like she's considering sending that one back. That's a card maybe you just want to draw later in the game to answer a Prince Philip. I believe the evasive Prince Philip is the only target available in the Emerald Sapphire deck. Neurofuzz keeping 2 cards. We have yet to see Neurofuzz on camera miss ramp on turn 2, the ever vital play for all these Sapphire decks. However, I've missed ramp, sending 7, miss ramp on camera, game 3 for top 16 of a CCQ. It's happened to me, but doesn't seem to happen to anyone else. I don't know what's up with that. All right, can Q take this game on the play and force A deciding game three here in the finals, starting out with inking Della's Moon Lullaby and that lady. Lady can quest for three as early as turn two with some combination of Webby and another character or character and a tramp. And meanwhile, we see Clarabelle deployed on turn one for Neurofuzz. We do see the Tipo pulled to the front there, so it certainly won't be missing ramp. And will we get to quest for three with this lady? Not quite, just one. So it needs its strength boosted by three in the turn in order to quest for three. And we do deploy Daisy Duck on turn two. Curious if that was drawn for the turn or we just opted for the lady on turn one over the Daisy Duck, maybe valuing, hey, I don't want to give you an extra card here in this early turns potentially, and trying ultimately one less lore for Q in that scenario. Neurofuzz, we can see both Prince Philips. We are going to ink the evasive Prince Philip, play a Tipo, think carefully about what you want to ink, and pass the turn back. So Q has an opportunity to quest for quite a bit here. A tramp would help quite a bit in that regard. We do see the Shift Lady up front. Not at its best here, has nothing to return at the moment. And these are the turns that are so important for the Dogs deck. I feel like Emerald Sapphire, you just kind of go through the motions in the early turns. You play your Clarabelle, you play your Tipo. You've done that hundreds and hundreds of times. Meanwhile, Dogs, so many decisions are possible, or so many options are possible, and these decisions are absolutely vital. So we do start quests with the Daisy Duck. Get some additional information before you make any additional plays. See that Sail the Azurite Sea sent to the bottom. All right, Mowgli. We know Ursula struggled to find anything. Does Mowgli find anything? We do. It's a bend to my will, but well, Neurofuzz probably isn't too disappointed to see that one go away. However, he does have the Cinderella. So I would have to imagine his plan was to play the Cinderella and ink the bend to my will to draw another card. So ultimately, Q just denying overall resources with that Mowgli. So thinking carefully about what he wants to ink, I assume we'll be seeing Cinderella here in the very near future. He could also be thinking about some challenging. Does he want to potentially give up this Clarabelle in order to perhaps double challenge the 1-2 lady? Q off to a good start. 5 lore, threatening for a lot more. 3 cards still remaining in hand. We know that she has a shift lady available. So even if one of these ladies is removed, that will be an option on a future turn. We are going to play the Cinderella. And now Neurofuzz just thinking, do I want to challenge? We're instead just going to send one single damage into the lady and pass it back because, of course, we want this Clarabelle to stick around. And I believe we chose not to trigger the Cinderella, it appears. Very interesting. So yeah, we know that there is, I believe, a Clarabelle, Shift Clarabelle in hand. So Q, can you piece together? I'd be thinking very carefully, what could that second card be if my opponent is willing to not trigger the Cinderella? Chat wisely points out it could be Under the Sea. And if it's if you're Q and you can piece that together, well, you're wishing maybe you had the Ursula on this turn. We do have a Mowgli, and we do find malicious, mean, and scary. So not quite the under the sea, but wanted to keep that malicious, mean, and scary available for future turns. So yeah, opting not to use the Cinderella, and now we can challenge this Mowgli into the Tipo. And what do we do with the remaining two characters? Each of these ladies, despite having an opportunity to be boosted in lore, currently only quest for one, as we see a tramp hit the inkwell that could boost both of them at once, but ultimately more valuable getting inked here. Now, we do know that there is the shift lady in hand. So perhaps questing here says, look, you could challenge some of my characters back, but I could potentially just pick them right back up. So the only card in hand is the shift Clarabelle. Did we draw an inkable? If we didn't draw an inkable, we can't even play this Clarabelle. You in a pretty good position here overall. I'm sure anxiously awaiting to find out what that mystery card is, as we all are as well. We are going to play a second Cinderella. Now, what do we do with these Cinderella triggers this time? I imagine we're going to be doing some challenging, at least with the Cinderella. But we can see the disruption coming in quite handy in this game compared to last game where the Ursulas were unable to nab any cards overall. But this time the Mowgli's coming in handy and answering both a malicious, mean, and scary and a bend to my will. So Q has that shift lady available. Does she deploy it here? In this position, it would be able to pick up one character. You could have have a cheeky challenge into the Cinderella and pick up the Mowgli, but is the lore more valuable in this situation? And Daisy Duck, it's been revealing a lot of actions off the top. No characters thus far, I believe. Uh, so not too disappointed to see that. And we are going to see that play. Just challenge into the Cinderella. Now we get to ink the Tramp 7, replay, or excuse me, shift onto the lady, and now we get to replay the other lady, and we could do some questing. We did have an opportunity. We could have challenged with the Mowgli to finish off the Cinderella, but the Cinderellas kind of aren't really doing a whole lot in this spot. We've seen two I don't know that I've ever seen this. There's been an opportunity for three separate Cinderella triggers, and none of them were utilized. So Cinderella has essentially been an uninkable 2, 3, 4 cost with no text. That is not where she's at her best. We do, of course, have the Clarabelle, and we are going to send those Cinderellas into the lady and then challenge the Daisy Duck. So that does clean up the board quite effectively, and we're only threatening 2 lore on the next turn. And the Clarabelle does draw 2 cards. If you Q, can you empty your hand enough to prevent this Clarabelle from gaining additional value? Well, we're going to add to our hand instead, but it's likely that we can play both of those characters this turn as we shift the lady. And the lady, Street Smart Dog. When that set came out, I figured both of these ladies that were in that same set were going to be very strong overall. And we kind of saw uh, a lot of these multicolored cards define certain color archetypes. If you're playing Amber Emerald, you're very likely going to be playing the dog package. We have 4 cards to choose from. We can ink for the turn and play 2 1-drops. We do ink a Lilo. 2 mystery cards in hand for Neurofuzz, ultimately deciding on deploying both characters that were returned with that Lady Shift trigger. So now Clarabelle, what could she do here? She can, of course, challenge the lady and remove some lore off the board, but there would still be 4 lore remaining. We know that Amber Sapphire has a number of very powerful cards in their deck. John Silver will buy us a turn, and Clarabelle's going to finish off this lady here. So we did see the triple John Silver draw be quite effective in game 1. Is 1 going to be enough in this scenario? So currently the Daisy Duck has Reckless. We of course know Q has things like Gogo Tamago available in her deck, which would just finish it straight away with this Clarabelle that currently has 5 damage. But instead we're going to Lady into Mowgli. What's that last hand? Just a Tipo in hand. Sure, there's no action to grab with the Mowgli, but you're very happy to see that that card is not too impressive overall. And meanwhile, we actually get to remove the Clarabelle from the board. It does cost the Daisy Duck board that need to be answered. You need to draw something quite good here. Under the Sea can't be sung, can't be played, and that's going to do it. We are going to a decider, game 3 in the finals of the Winter Lorefest, and they're playing for quite a bit. There is 6 boxes, a convention play mat, a ticket to the CCQ in Northern California, the Glimmer Games. But I believe the runner-up also got the playmat and ticket. So ultimately, just playing for a number of boxes, but those are some valuable boxes. I'm sure these players want to be opening Winter Spell as soon as it's available. So it would be a pre-order of sorts. If you can win here, you got a couple boxes rolled up to pick up in the near future. There's also 2 boxes of First Chapter on the line and 2 boxes of Whisper in the Well. Maybe you never completed your playset of some of those Whisper in the Well cards. You can go ahead and finish those off with a couple boxes, most likely. So 6 boxes for first place. And it looks like we're going to replace a sleeve here before we get started here in game 3. Or maybe just cleaning up that Webby. Making sure everything's on the up and up here. Back into the sleeve, ready to go here for the decider. So we saw Neurofuzz take some risky lines in the previous game, relying on the top of his deck and not utilizing those Cinderella triggers. But once again, he is on the play here in game 3. And this Emerald Sapphire deck is so strong, especially on the play, because there's so many lines that are just uninteractable for the opponent when things like Clarabelle and You're Welcome get involved. But You're Welcome, of course, is a song, so Q does have some tools at her disposal to potentially interact with that particular line. We saw the Mowglis were quite good. 3 of them showed up in game 2. Are we going to see Mowgli on turn 2 this game? Are we going to see an Ursula, perhaps? We will know in just a moment. Thank you for joining us. I know the Super Bowl is approaching in very short order, but we got one more game to go here at the Winter Lorefest. Who's going to be the winner? Let's hear a chat. Who's going to win this game, Neurofuzz or Q? What do you got for game 3? Each player shuffling each other's decks. Remember, as you always have the opportunity to touch your opponent's deck last, and that can, of course, include a shuffle in the mix. All right, the all-important altar phase in Disney Lorcana. The Sapphire deck, does it have ramp? It quickly is deciding on a few cards to send back. I see a Horseman Strikes yet again for Q getting sent back this game. Looks like 4 cards in total, so keeping 3. Meanwhile, for Neurofuzz, still deciding. Looks like we are going to keep 3 as well. So 4 new cards off the top. Or excuse me, Neurofuzz kept 4 total and added 3 new cards to his hand. So both players liking what they saw, at least a little bit, in that opening 7. All right, we're ready to kick things off here in game 3 of the finals of the Winter Lorefest. If you've been here all weekend or you're just joining us, thanks for being here. The pregame fist bump, and we're ready to go. Do we have Clarabelle on turn 1? Do we have Develop Your Brain? Do we have anything? We have an inked Sail the Azurite Sea into the Clarabelle. And what will be turn 1 for Q? Inking that Bobby Zimmerowski into the Daisy Duck. So recognizing that she needs to be aggressive here, especially on the draw. And what better way to do that than that Daisy Duck? So a second Sail the Azurite Sea. Inking a Malicious Mean and Scary. I'm taking a mental note of that. And what is the follow-up ink choice? Sail the Azurite Sea, one of the strongest cards in Disney Lorcana. Some may say the strongest card in Core Constructed overall. We are going to ink for that second time, thanks to that sale. Clarabelle, of course, stays put, as you could think, well, Clarabelle can actually safely quest in the face of the 1/4 Daisy Duck, but there, of course, are cards like Webby and Tramp that can get involved to boost the strength of the Daisy Duck. And if you are the control deck in this matchup, you simply can't make that risk of just one additional lore here in the early turns. We do have Daisy going in on a quest and 2 ladies added to the board. Do we have a Tramp follow-up to boost this lore total here with the ladies available? All right, Prince Philip into a second Clarabelle. And we inked a shift Clarabelle. That's about the biggest tell in the world that there is a second shift Clarabelle in hand. And Neurofuzz simply deploying the second Clarabelle just to empty his hand a little bit, but also say, if you can interact with this first one in any way, shape, or form, well, I have a backup ready to go. Now, if you're Q, can you empty your hand as much as possible in the face of the Clarabelle shift line? We start with inking Adela's Moon Lullaby into the Ursula, and we do hit a song. We do hit a Mother Knows Best, but notably that does reduce the hand size overall for Neurofuzz, although I suppose he would be singing it on the next turn as well. And we do, in fact, have the Tramp, so we could quest for 6 here. In the face of all these characters, in the face of a potential Clarabelle shift, is that what we want to do? Q decides yes. Quest for 6, thanks to that Tramp, and we do flip the Prince Philip. So we do know that there's no Malicious Mean and Scary in hand at the present time, but if we're able to draw one off the top here, that could be quite scary overall for Q. But if this Prince Philip currently in play, the Ward Prince Philip wants to challenge perhaps one of these ladies, well, of course, Q can challenge back and shut off that shift line. So now we are most likely going to see an ink into shift Clarabelle. But how many cards does Q have in her hand? It might not actually draw any additional cards. Maybe you just want the strength boost to allow for one of these Clarabelles to challenge more effectively. So maybe Daisy giving your opponent a card, sometimes there can be some upside. It's like, hey, you were going to get a card out of this Clarabelle anyway. Here, I'll just give it to you in advance. So Nerofa is weighing his options here. Thinking very carefully about what he wants to do. We do know he has the Shift Clarabelle in hand, ready to go, and certainly has an Inkable. We do know about the Prince Philip as well. So lots of shift opportunities for Neurofuzz. But how effective would a Clarabelle be here in this spot? This is game three of the finals. I certainly don't blame Neurofuzz for taking his time here, as very important decision making on this turn could be the determining factor of a win or a loss. Thinking things over, we see Clarabelle, we see You're Welcome. He could shift Clarabelle, play You're Welcome. We did not see the You're Welcome on the previous turn. Of course, the Ursula hit the Mother Knows Best in recent turns. So can he shift You're Welcome? Add some cards to Q's hand. Is that good enough? It would, of course, answer one of the threats on the board. We could challenge with this Prince Philip. I believe the finals is untimed. But Neurofuzz taking every opportunity to weigh his options on this turn. Q awaiting patiently. Neurofuzz pulls a card to the front, certainly thinking about. I feel like it's almost certain that we do see Clarabelle shifted on this turn, but just thinking very carefully about what he wants to ink prior to doing that. He may be forced to ink You're Welcome. And maybe that's, yeah, he pulled the You're Welcome to the front. Really can't come up with an answer in this spot as to what is the best play. All right, what are we gonna do? All right, we see that John Silver. I think that John Silver's going in Inkwell. He does decide ultimately John Silver into the Inkwell, seeing the You're Welcome on the tramp. Now, your next decision point is what do you want to do with these remaining characters? The remaining Clarabelle can't do a whole lot. It can challenge, sure, but it won't remove any characters as it stands. However, we do know we have Prince Philip remaining. Do we want to expose the Ward Prince Philip? We are going to draw two cards. Thanks to that, you're welcome. We do not do any challenging. We draw three cards, excuse me. We did see a Mowgli in Q's hand available, maybe to disrupt some of those new cards that were just added to hand. We know Malicious Mean and Scary would be a little scary, no pun intended. And we do see that Sail the Azurite Sea in combination with the malicious being scary, but there's not an inkable. Neurofuzz needs to draw an inkable to pull off the combo on the next turn. We have Bobby, draw and discard, get Lilo into the discard pile, and if we coast with this Daisy and there's an inkable character up top, that would be far from ideal. We saw Cinderella betray Neurofuzz in the previous game. Is the same going to happen here? We are going to quest with everything. It looks like 5 more lore up to 13. We have a Daisy trigger. Is it an inkable? It is a Tipo. Tipo showing up at the right time. And now Neurofuzz is threatening the Prince Philip malicious, mean, and scary shift combo on the following turn, and there's nothing Q can do about it. And if you're Q, you're just wishing that Sail the Azurite Sea wasn't in the hand. Of course, if he only had malicious, mean, and scary, well, he would have taken that. Or if the Mowgli was an Ursula instead. So we draw off the top. I think this Tipo would be going in the inkwell in record time if that was me. All right, so let's be careful, piece it together. We're gonna sing malicious, mean, and scary, and then presumably shift that Prince Philip. All right, that's step one. We don't even bother. We don't need to get out the counters. We know what's coming. Every character is going into the discard pile, and Neurofuzz can now get on the board for lore, questing for 4. And with no damage on any of these characters, something like a Gogo Tamago won't necessarily be effective here to try and finish things off. Q with 13 lore, how does she rebound from this situation? A lady is a good start into a Lilo. Neurofuzz on the verge of victory. Quickly inking for Cinderella. Okay. That doesn't answer a threat on board. And we're just going to go questing. That's 6 more lore, up to 10. Can only get to 17 on the following turn. And of course, Q can quest up to 16 here, maybe even more if we have a way to boost the lady. We do have Lilo available, but that's not going to be good enough. We're going to draw for our turn. What do we start things off with? We have a shift lady? Do we have a shift lady? Oh, we exerted 3 ink. We're going to back things up. Looks to me like there may be a shift lady available. That would allow for 4 lore gained. Okay, we're going to start off with a tramp onto the lady. Quest for 3, 4, 5, 18 lore. And just like that, Q is on the verge of victory. Neurofuzz needs to come up with some answers here. But what are we doing with this 3 remaining ink? We got to add another character to the board. We do a Raja. Well, there's the 2 ready characters that add up to 18. Very, very close game. Both of these players very skilled to get to this position. Game 3 of the finals. And this one is not going to last too much longer. All right, so what is Q thinking about here in this spot? Unclear. I don't believe she has any cards in hand, but perhaps she does. Neither of these ready characters can quest. Up to 18, threatening a victory on the following turn. What are those 2 cards in Neurofuzz's hand? If something can answer a threat in play, that could simply be enough to be victorious. We are going to have to do some challenging, though, too. Answer at least, well, really both characters are going to need to be answered. So that does reduce his ability to gain lore on the following turns. All right, chat points out she could be thinking about bodyguard here for the Raja. Of course, that is an option. Ultimately, leaving it ready. I like that choice. You have the win on board. You force your opponent to come up with an answer. What does Neurofuzz have? That is the face of a man that maybe didn't draw what he was looking for off the top, but I do see a malicious meaning scary, but that doesn't answer the tramp or the Raja. That's it. Q is victorious. Q wins the Lorefest, Winter Lorefest. Excuse me. Happy for Q. Well played. Those two ready characters at the very end. She had to fight through quite a bit. The Prince Philip combo, Clarabelle shift, you're welcome, but manages to find the exact lore total to get to 20 here in game 3 of the finals. Nicely done. Appreciate everyone watching. I know we're just moments away from the Super Bowl, so I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, but uh, I appreciate you sticking around if you will be switching over to that game. Congratulations to Q. Much appreciated to everyone behind the scenes at the Winter Lorefest and for bringing me on board. I was happy to do it and happy to see the high quality play here today in the top 8. So that's going to do it for me. I'm Shane Downey saying so long from the Winter Lorefest. Congratulations, Q, and see you next time.